The flames had long since died, but Abigail Rose Holloway could still feel their heat against her skin. 2 weeks had passed since the night her world burned to ash, yet the memory of fire remained seared into her consciousness, a permanent brand upon her young soul. She sat motionless on the edge of her borrowed bed, her small figure silhouetted against the pale moonlight streaming through the window of Margaret Whitman's modest home at the edge of Copper Creek. In her hands, she clutched a dented tin box, her knuckles white with the intensity of her grip. This box, salvaged from the smoldering ruins of her family's homestead, had become her most precious possession, the final tangible connection to a life that now existed only in memory. 8-year-old Abigail hadn't spoken a word since Sheriff Harrison had found her standing before the burning remains of her home, her blue eyes reflecting the dancing flames, but seeing nothing. The townsfolk of Copper Creek whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear. The ghost child, they called her, marked by tragedy and ill omen in their midst. With trembling fingers, Abigail opened the tin box. Inside lay a silver comb of unusual design, its intricate patterns unlike anything crafted by local silversmiths. The moonlight caught its polished surface, sending ripples of silver light across her pale face. On it, carefully folded, was a scrap of paper bearing her mother's elegant handwriting. "Remember, you are the bridge between two worlds." Abigail traced the unfamiliar patterns on the comb, feeling its cool weight against her skin. In the quiet solitude of night, she allowed the memory of her mother's voice to wash over her. Elizabeth Holloway singing a strange, haunting lullaby in a language Abigail didn't understand. The melody had flowed like water over stones, rising and falling in patterns that seemed ancient and mysterious to her young ears. A single tear escaped, tracking silently down her cheek. She made no sound, had made no sound since that terrible night. It was as if her voice had perished in the same flames that claimed her parents. But in the depths of her silence lurked a certainty, formless yet undeniable. Something remained unfinished. Her story, she sensed, was not ending, but beginning, though she could not imagine what shape it might take. Abigail closed the box and slipped it beneath the loose floorboard under her bed, her hiding place in this foreign house that was not home. As she curled beneath the unfamiliar quilt, she hummed her mother's melody silently within her mind, a private ritual of remembrance and connection to what she had lost. Copper Creek had grown from a mining settlement 30 years prior, nestled in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory. By 1885, it had established itself as a reluctant community, a collection of weathered buildings straddling the uneasy boundary between settled lands and what the townspeople called Apache country. The silver mines had largely dried up, leaving behind those too stubborn or too broken to move on. The steeple of the white-clappered church anchored one end of the main street, its paint peeling like old scars. At the opposite end stood the sheriff's office and jail, the two buildings keeping watch from opposing ends of civilization, like bookends holding the fragile pages of order between them. Margaret Whitman's home stood at the edge of town, surrounded by carefully tended herb gardens. The widow was known for her healing skills, respected, but viewed with a hint of suspicion by some who found her knowledge of native medicines uncomfortably extensive. She moved with the quiet efficiency of one accustomed to tending the sick and wounded, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her lined face bearing the map of a life fully lived. "You should eat something, child," Margaret said gently, setting a bowl of stew before Abigail at the breakfast table. "Food gives strength, and strength is what you need now." Abigail stared at the steaming bowl, acknowledging hunger as a distant sensation disconnected from her will to act upon it. After a moment, she picked up her spoon and began to eat mechanically, each movement deliberate and precise. Margaret watched her with keen eyes that missed nothing. Unlike the other townsfolk who avoided the silent child as if tragedy were contagious, the old healer had welcomed Abigail into her home without hesitation. There was something in the girl's quiet dignity that spoke to Margaret, a resilience beneath the trauma that reminded her of another young girl she had known long ago, a girl who had also lost everything yet somehow found the strength to rebuild. A knock at the door interrupted the quiet meal. Margaret rose to answer, her joints protesting the movement with small creaks of complaint. Sheriff Daniel Harrison stood on the porch, his broad-brimmed hat in his hands, the silver star on his chest catching the morning light. "Margaret," he nodded respectfully, "thought I'd check in on our young guest." Harrison was a man carved from the harsh landscape he patrolled, weathered and solid as the mountains themselves. Deep lines etched his sun-darkened face, particularly around eyes that had witnessed more than their share of frontier justice and human suffering. Yet there was a gentleness in how those eyes now sought out Abigail at the table, a careful tenderness that belied his imposing frame. "She's eating this morning," Margaret reported in a low voice. "Still not speaking, but she's taking care of herself. That's something." Harrison nodded, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Miss Abigail," he greeted her with formal courtesy as if addressing a lady rather than a child. "Fine day out there. Spring's coming to the hills." Abigail looked up at him, her blue eyes meeting his brown ones with an unsettling directness. Something in her gaze made Harrison shift uncomfortably, a perception beyond her years, as if she could see through the careful facade he presented to the world, glimpsing the guilt that festered beneath. "Any news about what happened?" Margaret asked quietly as Abigail returned to her meal. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing definitive, still investigating." His hand moved unconsciously to touch the gun at his hip, a habit born of years living with danger. "But I have my suspicions. The Reverend's sermon yesterday was particularly fiery." Margaret observed, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. "All that talk about cleansing the territory of heathen influence." "Reverend Montgomery has strong opinions," Harrison replied carefully, "as do many in town." Elijah Montgomery had arrived in Copper Creek 5 years earlier, a tall figure in black with a silver cross prominently displayed at his throat and fire in his sermons. He had quickly established himself as the moral authority in town, his passionate denunciations of Apache savagery finding fertile ground among settlers who lived in constant fear of raids, real or imagined. "Strong opinions don't burn homesteads," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison glanced toward Abigail, but the girl appeared absorbed in her meal, giving no indication she was listening to their conversation. "I should go," he said. "Got my rounds to make." As he turned to leave, Abigail's spoon clattered against her bowl, the sudden sound sharp in the quiet room. Both adults looked at her, but she had already resumed eating, her face as impassive as ever. Harrison paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Take care of her, Margaret, and yourself." Something in his tone suggested this was more than a casual farewell, a warning perhaps, though, of what remained unsaid. After he left, Margaret returned to the table, her movements slower now, weighted with unspoken concerns. "He's a good man, the sheriff," she told Abigail. "Carries too much on his shoulders, but his heart's in the right place." Abigail's only response was to finish her stew in silence, her thoughts hidden behind eyes too old for her young face. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Copper Creek's dusty main street as Abigail ventured into town for the first time since coming to stay with Margaret. The old healer had sent her to deliver a package of medicines to the general store, perhaps hoping the simple errand might help reintegrate the child into the rhythm of daily life. Abigail felt the weight of curious stares as she made her way down the boardwalk, her red hair catching the sunlight like a beacon. Conversations faltered as she passed, resuming in hushed tones when she had moved beyond hearing range. The ghost child, the survivor, the living reminder of violence that could reach any of them at any time. The general store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and the sharp tang of pickles in barrels. Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, accepted Margaret's package with a curt nod, his eyes skittering away from Abigail's direct gaze, as if her tragedy might somehow be contagious. "Tell Mrs. Whitman I'll have her order ready next week," he said, addressing the space above Abigail's head rather than the child herself. As she turned to leave, Abigail collided with a boy who had been examining a display of fishing tackle near the door. The impact sent him stumbling backward, his uneven gait causing him to catch himself against a shelf of canned goods. "Sorry," he exclaimed, steadying himself. "Didn't see you there." The boy was perhaps 12 years old, with a shock of dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. His right leg was noticeably shorter than his left, giving him a distinctive rolling walk. Unlike the other children in town who had taken to avoiding Abigail as if she carried some mysterious ailment, this boy looked directly at her, his gaze curious but kind. "You're Abigail Holloway," he said matter-of-factly. "You're staying with Mrs. Whitman now." Abigail nodded, uncertain how to respond to his straightforward manner. "I'm Noah Sullivan, my pa's the blacksmith." He gestured toward the forge visible through the store's window, where a large man was hammering glowing metal with rhythmic precision. I help him sometimes when my leg's not paining me too bad. There was no self-pity in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. Abigail found herself drawn to his honesty, so different from the whispers and sidelong glances she'd grown accustomed to. "Do you talk?" Noah asked bluntly. "Some folks say you can't on account of what happened." For a moment, Abigail considered maintaining her silence. It had become a shield of sorts, separating her from a world that had taken everything she loved. But something in Noah's direct gaze, free from pity or fear, made her want to respond. "I can talk," she said softly, her voice rough from disuse. "I just don't always have anything to say." Noah grinned, revealing a missing tooth on one side. "Fair enough. Most people talk too much anyway, saying nothing worth hearing." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Is it true what they say, that Indians killed your family?" Abigail's body tensed, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "I don't know who did it," she admitted after a long pause. "I was hiding. I heard sounds, but I didn't see faces." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Pa says it might not have been Apache at all. Says there are men in this town who'd kill for the right price, then blame Indians to cover their tracks." His words sent a chill through Abigail. They echoed her own unformed suspicions, thoughts she hadn't dared articulate even to herself. Before she could respond, Mr. Peterson called sharply from behind the counter. "Noah Sullivan, your pa's looking for you. Said something about needing help with the Carson order." Noah rolled his eyes but nodded. "Coming, Mr. Peterson." He turned back to Abigail. "I'm usually at the forge with Pa or by the creek east of town where the willows grow thick. If you ever want company that doesn't ask too many questions." The offer hung in the air between them. A simple kindness, a potential friendship in a world that had become achingly lonely. Abigail didn't answer, but as she watched Noah's uneven gait carry him out of the store, she found herself committing his face to memory. In the days that followed, Abigail began to venture further from Margaret's house, exploring the boundaries of her new existence. She followed the creek that ran behind the property, watching how it widened and narrowed, learning its rhythms and moods. One afternoon, she found Noah by the willows just as he had said she might. He was whittling a piece of wood with a small knife, his brow furrowed in concentration. Without looking up, he shifted to make room for her on the large rock where he sat. "Took you long enough," he said, as if he had been expecting her all along. Abigail settled beside him, watching the play of sunlight on the water. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the whisper of the willow leaves and the gentle scrape of Noah's knife against wood. "What are you making?" she finally asked. He held up the half-formed carving. "Eagle. Pa says they can see everything from up high, even things people try to hide." Abigail considered this. "Do you think they could see the truth about what happened at my home?" Noah's hand stilled. He looked at her with those perceptive dark eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe the truth is closer than you think." He hesitated, then added in a near whisper, "I know things most folks in town don't. Things I'm not supposed to know." "What kind of things?" Noah glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, though they were alone by the creek. "I can understand the Apache language," he confessed. "I hear what they say when they come to trade with Pa." Abigail's eyes widened. "How do you know their language?" Noah looked down at his carving, suddenly evasive. "Just do, but you can't tell anyone. Pa would tan my hide if he knew I was blabbing about it." "I won't tell," Abigail promised. She understood secrets, the weight of them, the necessity of keeping them buried deep. Noah smiled, relieved. "I knew you wouldn't. You're not like the other kids in town. You've seen things, you understand that the world isn't as simple as Reverend Montgomery makes it out to be in his sermons." Abigail thought about the silver comb hidden in her tin box, about her mother's note. "Remember, you are the bridge between two worlds." She had read those words over and over in the quiet of night, trying to decipher their meaning. "Noah," she began hesitantly, "have you ever seen a silver comb with strange patterns, not like the ones in the general store, but with designs that look like flowing water and mountain peaks?" Noah finished for her, his voice hushed with surprise. "Where did you see such a thing?" Before Abigail could decide whether to reveal her mother's keepsake, a shadow fell across them. They looked up to find Reverend Elijah Montgomery standing on the bank above them, his tall figure blocking the sun. Montgomery was an imposing presence, tall and gaunt, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that burned with zealous conviction. His black coat hung to his knees pristine despite the dusty frontier town, and the silver cross at his throat gleamed with meticulous care. "Young Mr. Sullivan," he said sternly, "your father is looking for you, and you, Miss Holloway, should not be wandering so far from town. These are dangerous times, especially for children who've already attracted the attention of savages." Abigail felt a surge of anger at his words, at the way he spoke of danger as if savoring the taste of it. Noah stood quickly, his face closing off into a mask of respectful attention. "Yes, Reverend," he said, "I was just heading back." He gathered his whittling materials, shooting Abigail an apologetic glance. Montgomery watched as Noah limped away, then turned his attention fully to Abigail. "Mrs. Whitman may have taken you in out of Christian charity, but do not mistake her kindness for permission to roam freely. The wilderness is no place for a child, especially one who has already been touched by tragedy." Abigail met his gaze steadily, refusing to be cowed by his authority. Something about the Reverend had always unsettled her even before the attack on her family. Her mother had avoided church services, preferring to hold their own small prayers at home away from Montgomery's fiery rhetoric. "Mrs. Whitman knows where I am," she said, her voice stronger than she expected, "and I'm not afraid of the wilderness." Montgomery's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you should be. God's protection extends only so far, especially for those who walk questionable paths." His gaze flicked to her hair, her features as if searching for something specific. "Your mother made certain choices in her life, choices that may have led to her unfortunate end." Abigail felt cold despite the warm day. "What do you mean?" "Sin has consequences, child, as does consorting with the enemies of civilization." He straightened his black coat, adjusting the silver cross at his throat. "Consider this a friendly warning. Stay close to town among God-fearing people. It's for your own protection." He turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly up the path toward town. Abigail remained by the creek, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. The Reverend's words had been delivered as concern, but she had heard the threat beneath them. She waited until he was out of sight before heading back to Margaret's house, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. As she walked, she found herself humming softly a melody her mother used to sing, its origin unknown, but its notes as familiar as her own heartbeat. That evening, as Margaret prepared a simple supper of cornbread and bean soup, Abigail sat at the kitchen table watching the old woman's efficient movements. The encounter with Reverend Montgomery had left her unsettled questions swirling in her mind like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. "Mrs. Whitman," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "why did Reverend Montgomery say my mother made choices that led to her death?" Margaret's hands stilled over the pot she was stirring. She turned slowly, studying Abigail with careful eyes. "You spoke with the Reverend today?" Abigail nodded. "By the creek. He said things about my mother, strange things." Margaret sighed, wiping her hands on her apron as she came to sit across from Abigail. "Elijah Montgomery sees the world in black and white, good and evil, with no shades between. It makes for powerful sermons, but poor understanding of people's hearts." "But what did he mean about my mother?" The older woman's face softened. "Your mother was different from most folks around here. She had connections with the Apache that some in town found troubling." "Connections? What kind of connections?" "Friendships, perhaps. Understanding, certainly." Margaret chose her words with obvious care. Elizabeth respected their ways, traded fairly with them when others wouldn't. In a place where fear often governs how people act toward those different from themselves, such behavior can be misunderstood. Abigail absorbed this, connecting it to fragmented memories. Her mother speaking words in a language unlike English, teaching Abigail songs with rhythms that didn't match any she'd heard in town, her reluctance to attend services where Montgomery preached against the heathen threat. "Is that why we live so far from town? Why my father built our homestead near the foothills?" "Perhaps," Margaret acknowledged. "Your father loved your mother deeply. He would have done whatever made her happy, even if it meant living apart from others." A new thought occurred to Abigail, sharp and disturbing. "Do you think that's why they were killed? Because my mother was friendly with the Apache?" Margaret's expression grew grave. "I don't know, child. But in times of fear, those who bridge divides often find themselves trusted by neither side and vulnerable to both. You are the bridge between two worlds." Her mother's written words echoed in Abigail's mind with new significance. Not a statement of fact, but a warning, a legacy. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Margaret rose to answer it, her manner suddenly alert. Sheriff Harrison stood on the porch, his expression troubled in the fading light. "Evening, Margaret. Abigail." He nodded to each of them, but his customary calm seemed strained. "May I come in for a moment?" Margaret stepped aside, gesturing him into the kitchen. "Supper's almost ready if you'd care to join us." Harrison removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture of unease rather than politeness. "Thank you, but I can't stay. I just wanted to check that everything's all right here. Heard from Gregory Sullivan that Reverend Montgomery had some words with Abigail down by the creek today. He told me to stay away from the wilderness," Abigail said, watching Harrison's reaction closely. "He said my mother made choices that got her killed." A muscle tightened in Harrison's jaw. Did he now? It wasn't a question, but a flat acknowledgement, heavy with implications. Margaret placed a protective hand on Abigail's shoulder. "Daniel, what's happening?" First the attack on the Holloway homestead, now these veiled threats against a child. Harrison's gaze shifted to the window as if checking that they weren't observed. "I've been asking questions around town, looking into who might have had reason to want the Holloway land. Found some interesting answers." "What kind of answers?" Margaret pressed. "The kind that powerful men don't want known." Harrison's voice dropped lower. "Margaret, it might be best if you and Abigail stayed close to home for a while, at least until I can sort things out." "You think we're in danger?" "Think caution is warranted." Harrison settled his hat back on his head, his decision to leave apparently made. "Lock your doors tonight." After he left, Margaret and Abigail sat in silence, the soup cooling forgotten on the stove. Finally, the old woman rose. "Well," she said with forced brightness, "we'd best eat before this gets cold. Nothing improves with worry, least of all bean soup." That night, as Abigail lay in bed listening to the chorus of crickets outside her window, she heard voices from the kitchen below. Margaret's and another's too low to distinguish words, but urgent in tone. Curiosity overcoming caution, she slipped from beneath her covers and crept to the top of the stairs, careful to avoid the creaking third step. "Found boot prints near where the fire started," Harrison was saying, his voice barely audible. "Army issue, and bullet casings that match standard military rifles. Not the kind of evidence you'd expect to find at an Apache raid." "And the cloth, you're certain?" Margaret's response was equally hushed. "Black fabric with silver thread caught on a fence post where the attackers would have entered the property. Like the kind used in clerical garments." Abigail's blood ran cold. Clerical garments like the black coat Reverend Montgomery always wore with its distinctive silver cross. "Be careful, Daniel," Margaret warned. "If what you're suggesting is true, you're dealing with a dangerous man, one who wields considerable influence in this town." "I know," Harrison replied grimly. "That's why I need more evidence before I make any move against him. The Holloway homestead sits on the best water source for miles, and there are rumors of silver deposits in that area. Powerful motivation for a man like Montgomery. And Elizabeth's history with the Apache." A heavy pause followed Margaret's question. "That may have made them targets as well. Montgomery's been stirring up hatred against the Apache for years. A family with sympathies in that direction would represent everything he claims to stand against." Abigail retreated silently to her room, her mind racing with what she had overheard. Reverend Montgomery, the moral voice of Copper Creek, the man who led prayers over graves and blessed newborn babies, might be responsible for her family's murder. And for what? Land, water, silver. Her mother's friendships with people Montgomery considered enemies. She retrieved her tin box from beneath the floorboard, opening it to stare at the silver comb. Its patterns seemed to shift in the moonlight, revealing new complexities she hadn't noticed before. Flowing water, mountain peaks, symbols of a connection she hadn't understood, but that had possibly cost her parents their lives. "You are the bridge between two worlds." Her mother's words were not just a statement or a warning, Abigail realized with sudden clarity. They were a responsibility, one she had inherited whether she wanted it or not. Dawn had barely begun to paint the eastern horizon when Abigail woke from restless dreams. Something had disturbed her sleep, a sound perhaps, or simply an inexplicable certainty that she needed to be awake. She dressed quickly in the faded blue dress Margaret had mended for her, pulling on worn boots that were slightly too large but serviceable enough. An unusual stillness hung over the landscape as Abigail slipped out of the house, careful to avoid the creaking porch step. The world was bathed in the gray light of pre-dawn dew, glistening on grass and spiderwebs alike. She had no clear destination in mind, driven only by a restlessness she couldn't name. Her feet carried her toward the creek, following its winding path upstream into the pine forest that marked the boundary between settled lands and what the townspeople called Apache territory. Perhaps it was the anniversary of some forgotten milestone, or perhaps it was her mother's spirit guiding her steps. Whatever the reason Abigail found herself drawn toward the wilderness, Reverend Montgomery had warned her against. The creek led her to a grove of aspens, their white trunks luminous in the growing light leaves trembling in the gentle morning breeze. Beyond them rose the dark pines of the forest proper, mysterious and inviting. Abigail paused at the edge of the grove, aware that she had never ventured this far alone before. A sound caught her attention, not the burble of the creek or the whisper of leaves, but a softer, more urgent noise. A whimper barely audible, like the cry of an injured animal. Abigail followed the sound, moving deeper into the aspens, her boots silent on the carpet of fallen leaves. The whimper came again, leading her to a small ravine where the creek had carved a path through the soft earth. There, nestled in a hollow beneath an overhanging rock, lay a bundle wrapped in an intricately patterned blanket. Abigail approached cautiously, her heart pounding against her ribs. The bundle moved, and a tiny fist emerged from the folds of the blanket, reaching blindly toward the sound of her approach. Abigail knelt beside it, gently pulling back the blanket. A baby, an Apache baby, gazed up at her with dark, solemn eyes. No more than 6 months old, its copper skin was smudged with dirt, a small cut on its forehead crusted with dried blood. The infant's face was pinched with hunger or pain, its small body trembling despite the warmth of the day. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She should be afraid, she knew. This was the child of the enemy, the people Reverend Montgomery claimed had murdered her family. Yet as she looked into those ancient eyes, she felt no fear, only a profound connection that defied explanation. Without hesitation, she gathered the baby into her arms, cradling it against her chest as she had seen her mother do with neighboring infants. The child stared up at her. Its crying ceased, its gaze locked on her face as if memorizing her features. "You poor thing," Abigail whispered, her voice gentle in the morning stillness. "You're all alone, aren't you, just like me?" As she adjusted the blanket around the baby, something fell from its folds, a silver medallion attached to a leather cord. Abigail picked it up, turning it over in her palm. The medallion was circular, etched with flowing patterns that made her breath catch. They were identical to those on her mother's comb. A chill ran through her, not of fear but of recognition. This was no coincidence. The baby had been placed here perhaps, or abandoned in haste during some unseen danger. But the medallion connected it to Abigail's own history, to the secrets her mother had carried to her grave. "I'll call you Echo," she said softly, the name coming to her unbidden, "because your cry was like an echo from my own heart." The baby, Echo, reached up and touched her face with a tiny hand, a gesture so trusting it brought tears to Abigail's eyes. She knew in that moment that she could no more leave this child than she could stop breathing. "I'll take care of you," she promised, gathering Echo in one arm. "We'll figure this out together." As Abigail stood, a shadow moved at the edge of her vision, a figure watching from the tree line. She turned quickly, a heart racing, but saw only the swaying branches of the pines. Yet she could not shake the feeling that she had been observed, that her discovery of Echo had been witnessed by unseen eyes. She hurried back toward Margaret's house, taking a different route to avoid being seen from town. The baby was surprisingly quiet in her arms, as if sensing the need for secrecy. Only the occasional soft coo broke the silence of their journey. Abigail's mind raced with questions. Who had left the baby? Why had it been abandoned with a medallion that matched her mother's comb? And most importantly, what would she do now Margaret might understand? She had shown no prejudice against the Apache in their conversations. But the rest of Copper Creek would react with horror and hostility if they discovered Abigail harboring an enemy child. Reverend Montgomery would use it as proof of the Holloway family's questionable loyalties. As she approached the edge of Margaret's property, Abigail made her decision. She would keep Echo hidden until she could learn more about the connection between the medallion and her mother's comb, until she could decipher the meaning behind her mother's cryptic note. "Remember, you are the bridge between two worlds." Little did she know that her discovery of Echo would set in motion events that would force her to become exactly that, a bridge between the white settlers of Copper Creek and the Apache people they feared and misunderstood. A bridge built by the most unlikely of architects, an orphan girl carrying the child of her supposed enemy. Margaret Whitman was in the kitchen, her back to the door as she kneaded bread dough with practiced hands. "Out early, were you?" she asked without turning. "The dew on your boots tells tales, child." Abigail froze, unsure how to respond. She had hoped to smuggle Echo into her room undetected to buy time to formulate an explanation that wouldn't result in the baby being taken from her. As if sensing her distress, Echo chose that moment to wake, emitting a small, hungry cry that echoed in the quiet kitchen. Margaret turned slowly, flour dusting her forearms, her keen eyes taking in the bundle Abigail clutched to her chest. "Well," she said after a moment of silence, "it seems you found something on your morning walk." Abigail stood, her ground arms tightening protectively around Echo. "His name is Echo," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I found him by the creek near the pine forest. He was all alone." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron, approaching with measured steps, her expression unreadable. "Let me see the child," she said, holding out her arms. Reluctantly, Abigail loosened her grip, allowing Margaret to take Echo. The older woman examined the baby with expert hands, checking for injuries or signs of illness. Her touch was gentle but thorough, her eyes missing nothing. "Apache," she said finally, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "A strong boy despite his ordeal. Hungry and a bit dehydrated, but otherwise healthy. I'm keeping him, Abigail declared, the words bursting from her with unexpected force. "I won't let anyone hurt him or take him away." Margaret looked at her sharply, then her expression softened. "No one's taking him anywhere just yet, child. First we need to feed him and clean him up. Then we'll talk about what comes next." She handed Echo back to Abigail. "Hold him while I warm some milk. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Abigail cradled Echo, relief flooding through her. She hadn't expected Margaret to be so calm, so accepting of the Apache baby's presence in her home. As Margaret prepared a bottle of diluted cow's milk with a spoonful of honey added for strength, she glanced at Abigail over her shoulder. "Did you find anything else with the child? Any sign of what happened to his people?" Abigail hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew the silver medallion. "Just this, it was tangled in his blanket." Margaret took the medallion, turning it over in her palm, her eyes widening in recognition. "I thought as much," she murmured. "This is a clan symbol belonging to the family of Chief Thunderhawk." "You know what it means?" Abigail asked, surprised. Margaret nodded slowly. "I've lived in this territory for 30 years, child. I've learned a few things about our Apache neighbors that most folks in Copper Creek would rather ignore." She handed the medallion back to Abigail. "That symbol represents water flowing from the mountains, the lifeblood of the desert. It's carried only by members of the chief's immediate family." Abigail stared at the medallion, then at Echo, who was sucking eagerly at the bottle Margaret had prepared. "He's the chief's grandson. Grandson more likely given his age. Thunderhawk is no longer a young man." Margaret sat heavily in her rocking chair, her expression troubled. "There are rumors of a raid on Thunderhawk's camp last week, not by our military, but by renegades, men operating outside the law, like the men who attacked my family." Abigail asked, the pieces beginning to fall into place. Margaret's gaze was shrewd. "Perhaps. Violence serves many masters in this territory." She nodded toward Echo. "What matters now is that child. If he is indeed of Thunderhawk's bloodline, his disappearance will be noticed. There may already be Apache warriors searching for him." "They won't find him," Abigail said fiercely. "I'll hide him. I'll protect him. And what of his people? Do they not deserve to know their child lives?" Margaret's voice was gentle but insistent. "Think, Abigail. If he truly is the chief's grandson, he represents more than just one life. He represents hope for his tribe, their future." Abigail looked down at Echo, who had finished his milk and was now watching her with those solemn dark eyes. She thought of her mother's words. "You are the bridge between two worlds." Was this what she had meant? That Abigail would one day be called upon to span the gulf between the settlers and the Apache? "I found him," she said softly. "That means I'm responsible for him. I have to make sure he's safe." Margaret nodded, accepting Abigail's determination. "For now we'll keep him here. But this secret cannot be maintained forever. Copper Creek has too many eyes, too many wagging tongues. She rose, moving to a trunk in the corner of the room. From it, she withdrew a small cradle, dusty with disuse. My William slept in this when he was a baby. It should serve for your echo until we figure out what's to be done. As Margaret placed the cradle near the fire and began to prepare a bath for Echo, Abigail felt a surge of gratitude for the old woman's understanding. She had expected resistance, perhaps even rejection. Instead, she had found an ally in her determination to protect the Apache baby. "Why are you helping us?" she asked as she gently undressed Echo for his bath. Most people in town would turn him over to the army, or worse. Margaret's hands stilled as she tested the water temperature. "Because I've seen too much hatred in my time, child. Too much blood spilled over the imagined differences." She met Abigail's gaze, her eyes filled with a wisdom born of hard experience. "And because I knew your mother." Elizabeth Holloway was a woman who understood that the lines we draw between peoples are fictions. Useful fictions, perhaps, but fictions nonetheless. Abigail's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her mother. "You knew her well." "Well enough to recognize her daughter's spirit," Margaret replied with a small smile. "Well enough to know she would be proud of what you're doing now." She helped Abigail bathe Echo, showing her how to support his head, how to clean him gently but thoroughly. The baby seemed to enjoy the warm water, kicking his legs and making small sounds of contentment. As they dried him and wrapped him in a soft blanket Margaret had unearthed from the trunk, Abigail remembered the silver comb hidden in her tin box. The connection between it and Echo's medallion could not be coincidence. "Mrs. Whitman," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to show you, something that belonged to my mother." But before she could retrieve the box, a knock came at the door, sharp, authoritative. Margaret quickly handed Echo to Abigail, gesturing for her to take the baby to the back room. "Not a sound," she whispered urgently. "I'll send them away." Abigail hurried to her room, heart pounding, Echo clutched tightly to her chest. Through the thin wall, she could hear Margaret opening the door, her voice carefully neutral as she greeted the visitor. "Sheriff Harrison, what brings you out this way so early in the day?" Abigail's breath caught. The sheriff was a good man, she believed, but would his duty compel him to report the presence of an Apache baby in their midst? Would he understand what she and Margaret were trying to do? Or would he see only a child of the enemy being harbored in secret? She pressed her ear to the wall, straining to hear their conversation, praying that Echo would remain quiet until the danger had passed. "Mrs. Whitman," Harrison's deep voice carried clearly through the house. "Is Abigail here? There's been a development in the investigation of her family's murder. Something she needs to know." Abigail's heart raced. A development. Had they found the killers? Were they Apache raiders, as everyone assumed, or something else entirely? Echo stirred in her arms, making a small sound of discomfort. Abigail rocked him gently, whispering soothing words against his forehead, willing him to remain silent just a little longer. "She's resting," Margaret replied smoothly. "The poor child hasn't been sleeping well, as you might imagine. Can this news wait until later?" There was a pause, then Harrison's voice lower now. "I suppose it can wait, but I'd like to speak with her today if possible. It's important." "I'll send her to your office when she wakes," Margaret promised. "What is it that you have discovered, if I may ask?" Another pause, longer this time. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was barely audible, forcing Abigail to press closer to the wall. "Boot prints," he said finally, "army issue, and bullet casings that match standard military rifles. Not the kind of evidence you'd expect to find at an Apache raid." "I see." Margaret's voice was steady, but Abigail could hear the tension in it. "And have you shared this information with others?" "No, and I don't intend to. Not until I'm certain what it means." The floorboards creaked as Harrison shifted his weight. "There's something else." A piece of cloth caught on a fence post near where the raiders would have entered the property. Black fabric with silver thread, like the kind used in clerical garments. Abigail's blood ran cold. Clerical garments, like the black coat Reverend Montgomery always wore with its distinctive silver cross. "Be careful, Sheriff," Margaret warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "If what you're suggesting is true, you're dealing with a dangerous man, one who wields considerable influence in this town." "I know," Harrison replied grimly. "That's why I need to speak with Abigail. She may have seen or heard something that night that could confirm my suspicions." "I'll send her to you," Margaret promised again. But Thomas, she used his first name, a familiarity Abigail had not heard before. Watch your back. Evil doesn't always announce itself with war paint and battle cries. The door closed and Abigail heard Margaret's footsteps crossing back to the kitchen. She remained frozen in place, Echo now sleeping peacefully in her arms, her mind racing with the implications of what she had overheard. If Reverend Montgomery was somehow involved in the attack on her family, it would explain his eagerness to blame the Apache, his warnings to her about questionable paths and consorting with enemies. But why? What could he possibly gain from the death of her parents? And how did Echo fit into all of this? Was his abandonment connected to the attack on her family, or was it a separate tragedy entirely? As these questions swirled in her mind, Abigail looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. One thing was certain, she had been right to take him in to protect him. If men like Montgomery were willing to murder innocent settlers and blame the Apache, what would they do to an actual Apache child found alone in their territory? Echo's small hand had curled around her finger in sleep, his grip surprisingly strong for one so young. In that simple gesture, Abigail found her resolve strengthening. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever secrets remained to be uncovered, she would not abandon this child. She would be his protector, his voice in a world that would deny him both. You are the bridge between two worlds, her mother had written. Perhaps this was the beginning of that bridge. A white girl and an Apache baby bound together by tragedy and a shared medallion that hinted at connections deeper than either of them yet understood. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face lined with worry. You heard, Abigail nodded. Is it true? Could Reverend Montgomery have killed my parents? Margaret sighed heavily, sitting on the edge of the bed. I don't know, child, but the sheriff's evidence suggests that whoever attacked your family wanted it to look like an Apache raid. That speaks to a calculated mind, not the heat of battle. She glanced at Echo, sleeping peacefully in Abigail's arms. What I do know is that this child cannot stay here indefinitely. If Montgomery or his supporters discover him, they'll use his presence to further inflame hatred against the Apache. They might even claim that you harboring him proves some kind of conspiracy between your family and the enemy. What should we do? Abigail asked, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her young shoulders. Margaret's expression was grim but determined. We need help. Someone who can communicate with the Apache, who might be able to get word to Thunderhawk about his grandson. She paused, considering. Noah Sullivan might be our best hope. Noah, Abigail was surprised. Because he understands their language, and because there's more to that boy than meets the eye. Margaret's voice lowered. His mother was Apache, a fact his father has tried to keep hidden since her death. If anyone in Copper Creek can help us bridge these two worlds, it's Noah. Abigail thought of Noah by the creek, his admission that he knew the Apache language, his evasiveness when asked how he had learned it. It made sense now. He wasn't just carrying the knowledge of another culture, he was carrying the blood of it in his veins. We'll speak to him tomorrow, Margaret decided. But first you need to go see Sheriff Harrison. Tell him what you remember about the night of the attack. Anything that might help him uncover the truth. But say nothing about Echo. Not yet. The fewer people who know about him, the safer he'll be. Abigail looked down at the sleeping baby, reluctant to leave him even for a short time. What if he wakes? What if he cries and someone hears, I raised a son and delivered countless babies in this territory, Margaret said with quiet confidence. I think I can manage one small infant for an afternoon. He'll be safe with me, I promise. With a final glance at Echo's peaceful face, Abigail carefully transferred him to Margaret's experienced hold. The baby stirred but did not wake, settling against the old woman's chest with a small sigh. Go now, Margaret urged, and Abigail, be careful what you say in town. Walls have ears, and Montgomery has many devoted followers. The sheriff's office was a simple wooden structure at the far end of town, distinguished from the surrounding buildings only by the weathered sign above its door and the hitching post where Harrison's horse dozed in the shade. Abigail paused outside, gathering her courage before climbing the 2 steps to the porch and pushing open the door. Sheriff Harrison sat at his desk, hat pushed back on his head, as he studied a map spread before him. He looked up at her entrance, his weathered face creasing into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Abigail, he said, rising from his chair, I'm glad Mrs. Whitman sent you. Please sit down. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, watching as she perched on its edge. Something about her posture, alert, defensive, reminded him of soldiers he'd known, men who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "I hear you've been doing better at Mrs. Whitman's." He began settling back into his own chair. "Starting to talk more, I'm told." Abigail nodded, her eyes scanning the office, noting the cells visible through a doorway. Why, at the back, the gun rack on the wall, the wanted posters with their grim-faced outlaws, always looking for exits, for dangers, for possibilities. A survivor's habit. "Mrs. Whitman said you found something," she said, her voice soft but steady, "about what happened to my family." Harrison's expression sobered. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "I did. Evidence that doesn't align with an Apache attack. Boot prints, bullet casings from Army rifles." He paused, studying her reaction. "And a piece of black cloth with silver thread, like the kind used in a preacher's coat." Abigail's fingers tightened around the edge of her seat, but her face remained carefully neutral. "You think Reverend Montgomery was there that night?" "I think it's a possibility I cannot ignore." Harrison's gaze was direct, unflinching. "Gee, Abigail, I need to know if you saw anything that night. Anything at all that might help me understand what really happened." Abigail looked down, considering how much to reveal. The sheriff seemed sincere in his desire for justice, but she had learned the hard way that adults often had agendas beyond what they admitted to children. "I was asleep when it started," she said finally, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Ma woke me, said I needed to hide, that bad men were coming. She put me in the root cellar under the kitchen and made me promise not to make a sound, no matter what I heard." Harrison nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I heard shouting. Men's voices, not Apache. They spoke English." Abigail's eyes grew distant as she recalled the terrifying sounds of that night. "They were asking Pa about papers, about a deed or a map. He kept saying he didn't have what they wanted." "Papers," Harrison frowned. "What kind of papers?" Abigail shook her head. "I don't know. Then there were gunshots." Ma screamed. "Something heavy fell." Her voice caught. "Then there was fire. I could smell it, see the light through the cracks in the cellar door. I stayed hidden until it was quiet, until the men had gone and the house was—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Harrison's face had hardened lines deepening around his mouth. "And you didn't see any of these men? Nothing that could identify them?" Abigail hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "Just this." She withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Unfolding it, she revealed a silver cross, small but ornate, with intricate engraving along its arms. "I found it on the ground when I finally came out of the cellar. It must have fallen from one of the men." Harrison took the cross, turning it over in his palm. "This is fine silver work, not something a common outlaw would wear." His eyes narrowed as he examined the engravings. "There's a maker's mark here from Santa Fe and initials." He tilted the cross toward the light from the window, squinting at the tiny letters etched into the back. "E.M." His gaze snapped up to meet Abigail's. "Elijah Montgomery." Abigail nodded, her suspicions confirmed. "He always wears a silver cross, but the night after the attack I noticed it was missing from his coat when he came to see me at your office." Harrison sat back, his expression troubled. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" "I was scared," Abigail admitted, "and confused. Reverend Montgomery is respected in town. I thought maybe I was wrong, that maybe it wasn't his cross." She met Harrison's gaze directly. "But then I heard him talking about my mother, saying she made questionable choices that led to her death, like he knew something about why they were killed." Harrison's jaw tightened. "This is serious, Abigail. If Montgomery was involved in your family's murder, it means this goes deeper than I thought. A man of the cloth orchestrating a massacre and framing the Apache." He shook his head as if unable to comprehend such darkness. "Why? Why would he want my family dead?" Abigail voiced the question, hanging between them. Harrison ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older, more worn. "I don't know for certain, but your family's homestead sits on a crucial water source, one that's becoming more valuable as the territory develops. And there have been rumors of silver deposits in that area. So it was about land, about money." Abigail's voice held disbelief that such ordinary motives could lead to such extraordinary brutality. "Often is," Harrison replied grimly. "Greed wears many masks out here, even holy ones." He carefully rewrapped the cross in the handkerchief and handed it back to Abigail. Keep this safe. It's evidence, and we may need it. Abigail returned the cross to her pocket, her hands trembling slightly. What happens now? Now I build a case, he said, his voice gentle. Gather more evidence before confronting Montgomery. He's a powerful man in Copper Creek with many supporters. We need to be certain before we move against him. Abigail nodded, understanding the delicate balance of frontier justice. She rose to leave, then paused, a thought occurring to her. Sheriff, do you know anything about the Apache chief called Thunderhawk? Harrison's expression shifted subtly, a flash of something, recognition, guilt, crossing his features before he controlled it. I've heard the name. He leads one of the larger bands in the territory. Why do you ask? Abigail chose her words carefully. Mrs. Whitman mentioned him, said there were rumors about his camp being attacked recently. There was an incident last week. Harrison confirmed, his tone neutral. Not officially sanctioned by the Army, but a group of men attacked a small Apache settlement in the foothills. Several killed, others taken prisoner. The Army's investigating, but he shrugged, the gesture conveying the low priority such investigations typically received. Was Thunderhawk among the dead? Abigail asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the hammering of her heart. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, curious about her interest. No, he wasn't at the camp during the attack. But there are reports that his young grandson was among those missing afterward. He leaned forward. Abigail, why are you asking about this? She met his gaze steadily. Just curious about the people everyone blames for my family's death. Harrison studied her for a long moment, as if trying to read beyond her words. Finally, he nodded. Be careful with that curiosity, Abigail. Knowledge is power in this territory, but it can also be dangerous. Yes, sir, she replied, rising from her chair. Thank you for telling me about the evidence you found. Thank you for bringing me this. He gestured toward her pocket, indicating the cross hidden inside. It helps confirm what I suspected. He paused, then added, Abigail, watch yourself around Montgomery. If he had a hand in what happened to your family, he won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens to expose him. The warning sent a chill through her, but Abigail nodded resolutely. I will. As she left the sheriff's office, the weight of what she had learned settled over her like a heavy blanket. Reverend Montgomery, the man who preached God's word each Sunday, who led prayers over graves and blessed newborn babies, might be responsible for her family's murder. And his silver cross, lost in the struggle, might be the key to proving it. But there was more. Echo was almost certainly the missing grandson of Chief Thunderhawk, taken during the raid Harrison had mentioned. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more complex and terrifying than Abigail had imagined. She hurried back toward Margaret's house, keeping to the side streets to avoid being seen. As she walked, Abigail felt the distinct sensation of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder but saw only the empty street behind her. Still, the feeling persisted, raising the fine hairs on the back of her neck. Somewhere in Copper Creek, unseen eyes were tracking her movements, measuring her as a threat. The truth she carried was dangerous to Montgomery, certainly, but perhaps to others as well. Men who would kill a family for land would not hesitate to silence a child who knew too much. The following morning, as Margaret tended her herb garden, Abigail sat on the porch with Echo, watching the baby's fascination with a butterfly that had landed on the railing. His solemn eyes tracked the insect's movements, tiny hands occasionally reaching as if to catch it. He seems fascinated by everything, Abigail observed, smiling at his intense concentration. Margaret looked up from her work, wiping soil from her hands. That's good. A curious mind is a gift. Mrs. Whitman, Abigail began hesitantly, I've been thinking about what Sheriff Harrison said, about Echo being Thunderhawk's grandson. What about it, child? If Montgomery was involved in the raid on Thunderhawk's camp, and if he finds out we're hiding Echo, he might... She couldn't finish the thought, the possibility too terrible to voice. Margaret's expression grew grave. All the more reason to find a way to return the child to his people, and quickly. A sound at the edge of the property drew their attention. Noah Sullivan emerged from the tree line, his uneven gait carrying him toward the house with surprising speed. His young face was etched with concern. You need to be careful, he said without preamble as he reached the porch. Pa says Reverend Montgomery was asking questions in town about you, about whether you've been acting strangely. He went to the general store and asked if you'd bought anything unusual like baby things. Cold fear washed over Abigail. He knows about Echo. I don't think so. Not yet, but he's suspicious. Noah glanced toward the baby in Abigail's arms, his eyes widening slightly. So it's true, you found an Apache baby. Abigail tightened her hold on Echo protectively. His name is Echo. I found him abandoned by the creek. He's Thunderhawk's grandson. Noah's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. That's why Pa sent me. He wants to talk to you and Mrs. Whitman. Says it's important. Margaret stepped forward, her manner suddenly decisive. Then we'll go to him. It's not safe to discuss such matters here, not with Montgomery asking questions. Within minutes, they had gathered what they needed. Echo's blankets, a bottle of milk, and the medallion Abigail had found with him. Margaret led them along a path through the woods that paralleled the main road, keeping them hidden from casual observation. The Sullivan Forge stood at the edge of town, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil growing louder as they approached. Gregory Sullivan was a broad-shouldered man with powerful arms and a face darkened by years of working the forge. He looked up as they entered, his expression grave as he set aside his hammer. Inside, he said simply, gesturing toward the door that led to the small house attached to the forge. Once they were seated at the kitchen table, Echo sleeping peacefully in Abigail's arms, Gregory studied the child with quiet intensity. Noah tells me you found this baby near the creek, Apache by the look of him. Abigail nodded. He had this with him. She placed the silver medallion on the table. Gregory picked it up, turning it over in his calloused fingers. His face showed recognition and something more, a deep personal reaction he quickly masked. This is the mark of Thunderhawk's family, he confirmed, specifically his daughter's line. The child you found is almost certainly his grandson taken during the raid last week. Can you help us return him? Abigail asked, hope rising in her chest. Gregory's expression grew guarded. It's not that simple. Relations between our people and the Apache are strained, especially now with Montgomery and others blaming them for attacks they didn't commit. But you speak their language, Abigail pressed. Noah told me his mother taught him. A shadow passed over Gregory's face and he shot his son a sharp look. Noah stared at the floor, abashed at having shared their family secret. Yes, Gregory admitted after a moment. Silver Moon was Apache from Thunderhawk's band. In fact, his niece, he touched the medallion gently. She wore one similar to this. It's how I recognized it. Then Echo is related to Noah. Abigail realized the connections becoming clearer. Gregory nodded reluctantly. Distantly, yes, these medallions are passed through the female line. Echo's mother would have been of Silver Moon's family. Then you have to help us, Abigail insisted. He belongs with his people. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket, withdrawing her mother's silver comb. She placed it beside the medallion on the table. This was my mother's. The patterns are the same. A heavy silence fell over the room as the adults stared at the comb. Gregory lifted it with careful hands, examining the intricate designs with a blacksmith's trained eye for metalwork. Where did Elizabeth get this? He asked finally, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. I don't know, Abigail admitted. She always had it. She used to brush my hair with it at night, singing songs I didn't understand. Margaret and Gregory exchanged a significant look. Songs in Apache, Gregory asked quietly. Abigail nodded, suddenly uncertain. Was my mother? No, Gregory said quickly. Not by blood, but she lived among them for a time as a young woman before she met your father. He set the comb down carefully. There are not many who know this story, Abigail. It could be dangerous for you if it became widely known. Why? Abigail demanded. What happened to my mother? Gregory sighed heavily, looking to Margaret as if seeking permission. The older woman nodded, once her expression solemn. Your mother was captured during an Apache raid when she was 16, Gregory began. Her family had recently settled near their traditional hunting grounds. Tensions were high. Rather than being killed, she was taken in by Thunderhawk's sister, Whispering Wind, who had recently lost a daughter to smallpox. Abigail listened rapt as Gregory unfolded a history she had never suspected. Elizabeth lived with the Apache for nearly 2 years. She learned their language, their customs. Whispering Wind gave her that comb as a symbol of acceptance into the family. Gregory's voice softened. She might have stayed forever, but the army launched a campaign against the Apache. In the chaos, Elizabeth was rescued and returned to white society. She never told me, Abigail whispered, struggling to reconcile this new image of her mother with the quiet, reserved woman she had known. She couldn't, Margaret interjected gently. Such associations would have made her an outcast. When she met your father and married, she put that part of her life behind her. Outwardly, at least. But she kept the comb in the songs, in the respect for a people most settlers view only as savages. And now you found Echo, Gregory added, bearing the medallion of his family, the same family that once took in your mother. It's not coincidence, Abigail. The old ones would say it's the working of forces beyond our understanding. Abigail thought of her mother's note. Remember, you are the bridge between two worlds. Had Elizabeth somehow foreseen this moment? Had she known that Abigail would one day find herself caught between the settlers and the Apache holding the fate of a child in her hands? We need to get Echo back to Thunderhawk, Abigail said decisively, before Montgomery finds him, before anyone else gets hurt. Gregory nodded slowly. It won't be easy. The Apache are in hiding after the raid, and they'll be suspicious of any white person approaching their camps, even a child. But not you, Abigail pointed out. You were married to one of them. Surely they would trust you. A shadow crossed Gregory's face. It's been many years since Silver Moon died, and my relationship with her people was complicated. Some believed I took her away from them. Others blamed me when she fell ill and died after Noah was born. He glanced at his son, who was listening intently, absorbing details of his mother's people that he had likely never heard before. But you'll try, Abigail pressed, for Echo's sake. Gregory's expression softened as he looked at his son, seeing perhaps the shadow of Silver Moon in the boy's dark eyes. Yes, he said finally, I'll try, but not alone. He turned to Margaret. Eleanor, you have more experience with healing than anyone in Copper Creek. If the child falls ill on the journey, we'll need your skills. Margaret nodded without hesitation. I'll prepare my medicines and pack provisions. When do we leave? Abigail asked. Tonight, Gregory decided. After dark. The less attention we draw, the better. He looked at Abigail and Noah. You children will need to stay here where it's safe. No, Abigail protested immediately. Echo knows me. He trusts me. I promised to protect him. And I know my mother's language, Noah added, standing straighter despite his twisted leg. Better than Pa does now. You might need me to translate. Gregory opened his mouth to argue, but Margaret laid a hand on his arm. They're right, Gregory. The children are part of this, whether we wish it or not. And Abigail has a connection to the Apache through her mother's history that might prove valuable. Gregory looked from Margaret to the determined faces of the children, then to Echo sleeping peacefully in Abigail's arms. Finally, he sighed in resignation. Very well, but you'll both follow my instructions without question. This journey will be dangerous, not just from the elements, but from men like Montgomery, who would stop us if they knew our purpose. Abigail and Noah nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of what they were undertaking. We'll leave at midnight, Gregory continued. Pack only what you can carry easily. Warm clothes, sturdy shoes. He looked at the silver comb and medallion on the table. And bring those. They may be our only proof of the child's identity and your mother's connection to his people. Midnight found them gathered behind Sullivan's forge, their preparations complete. Gregory had brought a small wagon with a canvas cover less conspicuous than riding horseback with a baby. Margaret had packed medicines, food, and extra blankets for Echo. Abigail and Noah had each filled a small sack with personal items. The night was clear, a half moon providing just enough light to see by without making them too visible to watching eyes. Gregory helped Margaret onto the wagon seat beside him, while Abigail and Noah climbed into the back, settling on either side of Echo's makeshift bed, a sturdy basket padded with soft blankets. Stay low and quiet until we're well out of town, Gregory instructed as he took up the reins. If we're stopped, let me do the talking. The wagon creaked into motion, following the road that led away from Copper Creek toward the foothills where the Apache made their camps. Abigail's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time since the attack on her family, she was doing something active, something purposeful, rather than simply surviving from one day to the next. They passed through town without incident, the streets deserted at this late hour. Even the saloon was quiet, its windows dark. Only as they reached the outskirts did Abigail spot a lone figure watching from the shadows of the livery stable. Sheriff Harrison, his face unreadable in the moonlight. He made no move to stop them, merely touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or warning. Once beyond the town limits, Gregory urged the horses to a faster pace. The wagon bounced along the rutted road, forcing Abigail and Noah to hold on to Echo's basket to keep it steady. The baby slept through the jostling, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Where exactly are we going? Abigail whispered to Noah as they settled into the rhythm of travel. Apache camps move with the seasons, Noah replied, his voice low to avoid being overheard by his father. But there are certain places they return to, especially when they feel threatened. Pa thinks Thunderhawk will have taken his people to Hidden Valley, a place deep in the foothills that's easily defended. How long will it take to get there? 2 days, maybe 3, depending on the trails and whether we're followed. Noah glanced back toward Copper Creek, now vanishing in the distance. Pa's worried about Montgomery, says he's got men who do his bidding without asking questions. Abigail thought of the silver cross in her pocket of the boot prints Harrison had found at her family's homestead. He killed my parents, she said softly. I'm sure of it now, but I don't understand why. Noah was silent for a moment, his young face serious in the moonlight. Land maybe, or water rights, or... He hesitated, then continued reluctantly. Or maybe because of your mother's connection to the Apache. If Montgomery knew about that, he might have seen your family as traitors to the settlers. The possibility sent a chill through Abigail. Had her mother's past, a history Abigail herself had never known, been the reason for her family's destruction? Had Elizabeth Holloway died because she had once lived among the people Montgomery considered enemies? These thoughts accompanied Abigail as the wagon rolled through the night, carrying them further from the false safety of Copper Creek and deeper into the wilderness where different dangers waited. Echo slept on, unaware that his fate, and perhaps the fate of two peoples, rested in the hands of an unlikely group of travelers guided by silver ornaments and shared bloodlines. Dawn found them camped in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a narrow stream. Gregory had driven through the night, taking them far from the main trails and into the less traveled backcountry. Now, as the first light touched the eastern horizon, he finally called a halt to rest the horses and allow the travelers a few hours' sleep. Abigail was exhausted, but too keyed up to rest. While the others arranged bedrolls in the shade of the trees, she took Echo to the stream, washing his face and hands in the cool water. The baby was awake and alert, watching her with those solemn, dark eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations. You're going home, she told him softly, letting him grasp her finger. To your grandfather, your people. They must miss you terribly. Echo made a small, cooing sound, his tiny face breaking into a smile that caught Abigail's heart. In the few days since she had found him, he had become precious to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The thought of parting from him brought an unexpected ache to her chest. I'll miss you, oh, she admitted, the words barely audible over the gentle gurgle of the stream. But you belong with them, not with me. He belongs with those who love him, said a voice behind her. Abigail turned to find Margaret approaching, her silver hair glowing in the early light. And love knows no boundaries of blood or race. Abigail lifted Echo into her arms, cradling him against her chest. Do you think his family will accept me, after everything that's happened between our peoples? Margaret sat beside her on a sun-warmed rock, her aging joints creaking with the movement. The heart recognizes its own across all divides, she said simply. Your mother found acceptance among them once. I believe you will too. I wish I had known, Abigail said, a hint of resentment coloring her words. About my mother, about her time with the Apache. Why did she keep it secret from me? To protect you, Margaret replied gently. Elizabeth knew the prejudices of Copper Creek, the danger of being seen as sympathetic to the Apache. She wanted you to form your own opinions, make your own choices without that burden. But she left me the comb, the note about being a bridge. She must have wanted me to know someday. Margaret nodded. I believe she was waiting for the right time when you were old enough to understand. The attack came before that time arrived. She reached out to stroke Echo's dark hair. But perhaps she guides you still in ways we cannot see. Perhaps she led you to this child knowing you would recognize the connection between his medallion and your comb. The thought was comforting, and that her mother might still be watching over her, directing her path from beyond death. Abigail looked down at Echo, who had drifted back to sleep against her shoulder, his small body warm and trusting. I'm afraid, she confessed, the words easier to speak in the quiet dawn, away from the others. Not of the journey or the Apache, but of what happens after. Where do I belong once Echo is returned? Not in Copper Creek, not with Montgomery, still there. Margaret considered this, her lined face thoughtful. Home isn't always a place, child. Sometimes it's the people who understand your heart. She gestured toward the camp, where Gregory and Noah were preparing a small fire for breakfast. Perhaps your home is with those who share your journey, who see beyond the boundaries others have drawn. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting short shadows across the cottonwood grove where the small party had made their temporary camp. Gregory Sullivan stood at the edge of the trees, scanning the horizon with the careful attention of a man accustomed to danger. His weathered face betrayed nothing but the tension in his shoulders spoke of growing unease. "We should move on soon," he said, turning back to the others. "I don't like being exposed in daylight." "Do you think we're being followed?" Margaret asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Noah with a grateful nod. Gregory's gaze shifted to the trail behind them. "Hard to say, but Montgomery has eyes everywhere. If he's figured out what we're doing," he didn't need to finish the thought. They all understood the stakes, not just for Echo, but for themselves. By attempting to return the Apache baby to his people, they were defying the prevailing attitudes of Copper Creek and challenging Montgomery's narrative about Apache savagery. Noah, who had been keeping watch from a high point among the rocks, scrambled down to join them. "Riders," he reported tersely, "3 of them coming from the direction of town." Gregory was on his feet instantly, dousing the fire with water from his canteen. "Pack up," he ordered quickly. "We need to be moving before they spot our camp." Abigail clutched Echo tighter as the peaceful moment shattered. Margaret hurried to gather her medicines while Gregory and Noah hitched the horses to the wagon with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they were ready to depart, all signs of their brief rest erased from the clearing. Gregory helped Abigail into the wagon, then paused, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "If we're separated," he said quietly, "continue northwest toward the tallest peak you can see. Hidden Valley lies in its shadow. Ask for Thunderhawk by name and show them the Coman medallion." Abigail nodded, understanding that he was preparing her for the worst. "We won't be separated," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We'll reach Hidden Valley together." Gregory's smile was fleeting but genuine. "Your mother had that same determination. It served her well among the Apache." He squeezed her shoulder once, then moved to help Margaret onto the wagon seat. They set off at a brisk pace, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the foothills. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to slow occasionally as the wagon navigated around boulders or across shallow streams. Gregory kept them away from the main trails, choosing less traveled paths that would be harder for pursuers to follow. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. Echo grew fussy in the heat, his small face reddening despite the shade of the wagon's canvas cover. Abigail dampened a cloth with precious water from their canteen, bathing his face and neck to cool him. "He needs proper shelter," Margaret said worriedly, reaching back to feel the baby's forehead. "This heat isn't good for one so young." Gregory, who had been scanning the horizon with growing concern, nodded burnily. "There's an abandoned line shack about 2 miles ahead. We can rest there until evening." The line shack proved to be little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls and a roof with a single window and door, but it offered blessed shade and protection from prying eyes. Gregory concealed the wagon behind a stand of junipers while the others carried their essential supplies inside. The interior was dusty but intact, with a simple stone fireplace and the remains of a rough-hewn table. Margaret set about making a comfortable spot for Echo in a corner, away from the window, using blankets to create a soft nest. Abigail settled the baby there, relieved to see his fussiness subside in the cooler air. Noah kept watch at the window, his sharp eyes tracking the landscape for any sign of movement. "No riders yet," he reported. "Maybe we lost them." "Maybe," Gregory agreed, though his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. "But we'll stay alert. I'll take first watch outside. Noah, you rest. I'll need you fresh for tonight's journey." As Gregory stepped outside, Abigail noticed a shadow cross Margaret's face, a flicker of pain quickly suppressed. The older woman sank onto a wooden stool, one hand pressed to her side, her breathing slightly labored. "Are you all right?" Abigail asked, moving to her side. Margaret attempted a reassuring smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired, child. These old bones aren't meant for such adventures." But Abigail wasn't fooled. She had watched her mother hide illness from her father, had learned to recognize the signs of pain concealed behind false cheer. "You're hurt," she said, not a question, but a statement. Margaret sighed, abandoning the pretense. "A touch of pleurisy, I think. The dust, the exertion. It's aggravated an old condition." She straightened, wincing slightly. "But don't fret. I've brought medicines for just such an eventuality." She directed Abigail to her bag of remedies, instructing her to prepare a tea from dried herbs carefully wrapped in paper. As Abigail worked heating water over a small spirit lamp Margaret had brought, she couldn't help but worry. They were far from help in harsh country with at least another day's journey ahead of them. If Margaret's condition worsened, the older woman seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll be fine, Abigail. I've weathered worse in my time." She accepted the steaming cup of tea with grateful hands. "This will ease the inflammation. By evening, I'll be ready to continue." Abigail wasn't so sure, but she nodded, unwilling to challenge Margaret's assessment. Instead, she turned her attention to Echo, who was awake again and watching the dust motes dance in the beam of sunlight from the window. His solemn eyes tracked each glittering particle, tiny hands occasionally reaching as if to catch them. "He seems fascinated by light," Noah observed, taking a break from his vigil to sit beside Abigail. "My pa says Apache babies are taught to observe everything from birth. The movement of animals changes in weather patterns of light and shadow. It's how they learn to survive in the desert." Abigail smiled at the thought. "He's learning already." "Then that's good. He'll need those skills when he returns to his people." Noah studied her face with surprising perception for a boy his age. "You'll miss him," he said simply. Abigail nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The attachment she felt to Echo had grown stronger with each passing day, each challenge overcome together. The thought of saying goodbye created a hollow ache in her chest. "You could stay with them, you know," Noah suggested hesitantly. "The Apache, I mean, like your mother did. They might accept you, especially if you bring the chief's grandson back to him." The idea was both terrifying and strangely appealing. To live among people who had known and accepted her mother, to learn their ways, their stories, their understanding of the land. But could she truly belong there? Would they welcome a white child into their midst, even one with her unusual history? "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "You could come back to Copper Creek with us," Noah offered. "Stay with Pa and me. Once Montgomery is exposed for what he did to your family, it would be safe enough." Abigail considered this alternative. A return to the town that had whispered about her, avoided her, treated her as an ill omen. Could Copper Creek ever truly be home again after all that had happened? Before she could respond, the door burst open. Gregory stood there, his expression urgent. "Riders," he said tersely. "Coming fast. Get everything packed. We need to move." The peaceful interlude shattered, replaced by frantic activity as they gathered their belongings. Margaret moved more slowly than before, her breathing still labored despite the tea. Abigail packed Echo's things while Noah helped his father prepare the wagon. "Who is it?" Abigail asked as she lifted Echo into her arms. "Montgomery's men." Gregory checked the loading of a rifle he had retrieved from beneath the wagon seat. "Can't tell from this distance, but they're following our trail and they're armed." He glanced at Margaret, noting her pallor with concern. "Eleanor, can you travel?" Margaret straightened her spine with visible effort. "I can and I will. This child must reach his people regardless of my discomfort." Gregory nodded, respecting her determination. "We'll take the high trail through the mesas. It's rougher going, but it offers more cover and places to defend if necessary." They loaded the wagon quickly, Gregory helping Margaret onto the seat, while Abigail and Noah climbed into the back with Echo. The baby, sensing the tension, remained unusually quiet, his dark eyes wide as they fixed on Abigail's face. "It's all right," she whispered, holding him close. "I won't let anything happen to you, I promised." The wagon lurched into motion, following a steep trail that wound upward into the rocky foothills. The horses strained against the incline, their hooves slipping occasionally on loose stones. Gregory urged them on with quiet commands, his experienced hands guiding them along the treacherous path. From her position in the back of the wagon, Abigail could see down into the valley they were leaving behind. The riders Gregory had spotted were clearly visible now. 3 men on horseback, moving with purpose along their trail. Even at this distance, Abigail recognized the black coat and distinctive posture of the lead rider. "It's Reverend Montgomery," she said, her voice tight with fear and anger. "He's coming himself." Gregory glanced back, his expression grim. "He must have figured out what we're doing, or at least that we've taken the Apache child." He turned his attention back to the difficult trail. "Hold tight, this next section is rough." The wagon jolted over a series of rocky outcroppings, forcing Abigail and Noah to brace themselves against the sides. Echo began to cry, frightened by the violent movement. Abigail cradled him close, singing softly. one of her mother's Apache lullabies, the words unfamiliar, but the melody soothing. The song seemed to calm Echo, but it had an unexpected effect on Noah. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with recognition. "That song," he said, his voice hushed with awe, "it's the blessing song. My mother used to sing it to me." Abigail continued the melody, encouraged by Echo's response. "My mother sang it every night before bed. I never knew what the words meant." Noah listened intently, then began to sing along, his young voice matching the ancient words to Abigail's tune. "It's a prayer for protection," he explained between verses, asking the ancestors to watch over the child during the night journey. The beauty of the moment, two children from different worlds sharing a song that bridged their cultures, was broken by a sharp crack from behind them. A bullet whizzed past, embedding itself in the wagon's wooden side panel inches from where they sat. "Get down!" Gregory shouted, urging the horses to greater speed despite the dangerous terrain. "Stay low and hold on to Echo." Abigail and Noah ducked beneath the wagon's canvas cover, shielding Echo between them, as more shots rang out. The pursuers had closed the distance faster than expected and were now firing at the fleeing wagon with reckless abandon. "They're shooting at us!" Noah exclaimed, his voice tight with disbelief. "At children." "They're shooting at Echo," Abigail corrected, grimly, understanding with sudden clarity. "They can't let him reach his people. He's evidence of their crime." The wagon careened around a bend in the trail, momentarily out of the pursuers' line of fire. Gregory used the respite to halt briefly beside a towering boulder. "Take this," he said, passing the rifle back to Noah. "You know how to use it." Noah nodded, his young face solemn as he accepted the weapon. "Pa taught me." "Good. I'm going to draw them off. You continue along this trail. It leads directly to Hidden Valley." Gregory's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear for their safety. "Take care of your grandmother and Abigail. Get Echo to Thunderhawk." "No," Abigail protested. "We stay together. You said so yourself." Gregory's expression softened as he looked at her. "Plans change, Abigail. This is the only way to ensure you all reach safety." He glanced at Margaret, who had remained stoically silent during the pursuit. "Eleanor, you know I'm right." Margaret nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Gregory. These are desperate men." "I know their kind well enough." Gregory checked his pistol, then climbed down from the wagon. "I'll meet you in Hidden Valley when I can. If I don't arrive by tomorrow, sunset, speak to Thunderhawk. Tell him." He hesitated, then finished firmly. "Tell him I honored my promise to Silver Moon." With that, he slapped the nearest horse's flank, sending the wagon lurching forward along the trail. As they rounded the next bend, Abigail looked back to see Gregory disappearing into the rocks, moving perpendicular to their path to create a false trail for their pursuers to follow. Noah took the reins, his small hands surprisingly capable, as he guided the horses along the narrow track. Margaret sat beside him, one hand pressed to her side, her face pale but determined. Abigail cradled Echo in the back, her heart pounding with fear, not just for themselves but for Gregory, facing three armed men alone in the wilderness. The sound of gunfire echoed through the canyons behind them. One shot, then another, then a volley that spoke of a firefight in progress. Abigail closed her eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer to whatever powers might be listening, Apache or Christian, to protect the blacksmith who had risked everything to help them. The wagon continued its ascent, the trail growing steeper and more precarious with each mile. By late afternoon, they had reached a high pass where the wind blew cold despite the season. Margaret's condition had worsened, her breathing shallow and labored, her complexion taking on a worrying grayish tinge. "We need to stop," Abigail insisted when Noah would have pressed on. "Mrs. Whitman needs rest." Noah glanced at his grandmother with concern, then nodded, guiding the wagon to a relatively flat area sheltered by a rocky overhang. "Just for a little while," he agreed. "We're still too exposed here." They helped Margaret down from the seat, settling her on a blanket in the shelter of the rocks. Abigail prepared another dose of the herbal tea, while Noah checked on the horses and kept watch for any sign of pursuit. "The medicine isn't working as well," Margaret had admitted when Abigail brought her the steaming cup. "The pleurisy is worsening. I can feel the fluid building." Abigail sat beside her, Echo sleeping peacefully in her lap. "What can we do? There must be something stronger in your bag." Margaret shook her head. "What I need isn't in my bag, child. I need rest, warmth, proper care, none of which we can afford on this journey." She sipped the tea, wincing slightly at its bitterness. But don't worry about me. Focus on getting Echo to his people. That's what matters now. You matter too, Abigail insisted, unwilling to accept the older woman's resignation. We're not leaving you behind. Margaret smiled faintly. Of course not, but you must be prepared for what might happen if my condition deteriorates further. She paused, her breathing labored. The Apache will have medicines that could help if we reach them in time. The implication was clear. Margaret's survival might depend on reaching Hidden Valley quickly, yet they were still hours away with darkness approaching and the uncertain fate of Gregory Sullivan hanging over them. Noah returned from his watch, his young face troubled. No sign of Pa or the pursuers, but there's smoke to the north. A large encampment, I think. Could be the Apache. Hope surged in Abigail's chest. How far? Maybe 2 hours by wagon, less if we went on foot. Noah glanced at his grandmother, clearly torn between the need for haste and concern for her condition. Margaret made the decision for them. We continue by wagon, she said firmly. All of us together. I'll manage until we reach the camp. She struggled to her feet, accepting Abigail's supporting arm. Let's not waste the daylight we have left. They helped her back onto the wagon seat, arranging blankets around her to ward off the mountain chill. Abigail settled in the back with Echo, who had awakened and was watching the changing light with his solemn dark eyes. Noah took the reins again, guiding the horses carefully along the increasingly narrow trail. As they crested the pass, the landscape opened before them, a vista of rugged beauty with forested slopes giving way to dramatic canyons. In the distance, the smoke Noah had spotted rose in thin columns against the darkening sky, confirming the presence of an encampment in the valley below. Hidden Valley. Noah breathed a note of awe in his voice. Pa said the Apache believe it's sacred ground protected by the spirits of their ancestors. Abigail studied the terrain, trying to gauge the safest route down from their elevated position. The trail split ahead, one branch continuing along the ridge, the other descending more directly toward the valley floor. Which way? She asked, deferring to Noah's greater knowledge of the area. Noah hesitated, clearly weighing their options. The ridge trail is longer but gentler. The direct path is steep. Might be too rough for the wagon. Margaret, who had been silent for some time, spoke up weakly. Take the direct path. I don't think... She broke off, a fit of coughing overtaking her. When it subsided, she continued with effort. I don't think I can last much longer. We need to reach help quickly. The decision made, Noah guided the wagon onto the steeper trail. The descent was harrowing, the horses picking their way carefully down the rocky path, the wagon creaking and groaning with each jolt. Abigail held Echo tightly, protecting him from the worst of the bouncing. They were halfway down when disaster struck. A wheel hit a large rock, causing the wagon to lurch violently to one side. The wooden axle, already stressed from the difficult journey, gave way with a sickening crack. The wagon tilted precariously, then toppled onto its side, sending its occupants tumbling. Abigail curled her body around Echo as they fell, taking the brunt of the impact on her shoulder and back. Pain flared along her side, but she held the baby secure, relieved to hear his startled cry, proof that he was alive and relatively unharmed. Noah, Mrs. Whitman, she called, struggling to orient herself in the overturned wagon. Here? Noah replied, his voice tight with pain. My leg is trapped under the seat. Abigail carefully set Echo down on a blanket that had fallen nearby, then crawled toward Noah's voice. The boy was pinned beneath a heavy wooden bench that had served as the wagon's front seat. His face was pale, his teeth gritted against obvious pain. Don't move, Abigail instructed, assessing the situation. Let me try to lift it. She braced herself and pushed against the bench with all her strength. It shifted slightly, but not enough to free Noah. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. They were stranded on a mountain trail with night approaching, a sick woman, an injured boy, and an infant to protect. Mrs. Whitman, she called suddenly, realizing she hadn't heard from the older woman. Are you all right? There was no response. Abigail looked around frantically, finally spotting Margaret's still form several feet from the wagon. She had been thrown clear in the accident and now lay motionless on the stony ground, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Oh no, Abigail whispered, torn between helping Noah and checking on Margaret. Noah, I need to see if your grandmother is alive. I'll be right back. Go, Noah urged, his voice strained but steady. I'm not going anywhere. Abigail scrambled to Margaret's side, her heart pounding with fear. The older woman's face was ashen, her breathing shallow and irregular. When Abigail gently touched her shoulder, Margaret's eyes fluttered open, cloudy with pain and confusion. "Abigail," she murmured, "the baby." "Echo's fine," Abigail assured her quickly, "but you're hurt, and Noah's trapped in the wagon. I don't know how to help you both." Margaret's gaze cleared somewhat, her innate practicality asserting itself despite her injuries. "Check my bag," she instructed weakly. "Blue bottle. For pain." Abigail scrambled back to the overturned wagon, locating Margaret's medicine bag among the scattered supplies. She found the blue bottle, a tincture of laudanum, and returned to administer a few drops to the injured woman. "Now, Noah," Margaret whispered, the laudanum already beginning to ease her pain. "Use the leverage. Branch as fulcrum." Understanding dawned on Abigail. She searched the surrounding area, finding a sturdy branch that had fallen from a nearby pine. Using it as a lever with a rock as a fulcrum point, she was able to lift the bench enough for Noah to pull his injured leg free. The boy's face was gray with pain, his right leg, already misshapen from his previous injury, now sporting an angry new break just above the ankle. Yet he dragged himself to his grandmother's side, medical knowledge beyond his years, evident in the way he quickly assessed her condition. "Multiple broken ribs," he reported grimly. "Arm fractured, and the pleurisy is worse." He looked at Abigail, his young face aged by worry. "She needs help beyond what we can provide, and soon." Abigail glanced at the smoke rising from the valley below, now more distant than ever given their situation. "I'll go," she decided. "Down to the Apache camp. Bring back help." "Alone," Noah's voice cracked with fear for her. "It'll be dark soon. The trail is treacherous." "I have to try. You can't walk and Mrs. Whitman can't move." Abigail was already gathering essential supplies. Water Echo's blankets, her tin box with its precious contents. "I'll take Echo. If I reach the camp, he's our best chance of being welcomed, rather than killed as intruders." Noah couldn't argue with her logic, though his expression revealed his fear for her safety. "Take the rifle," he insisted, retrieving it from the wagon wreckage. "And this." He pulled a small object from his pocket, a carved wooden eagle, the one he had been working on by the creek. "For luck," he explained, pressing it into her hand. Abigail tucked the carving into her pocket, touched by the gesture. She knelt beside Margaret, who had drifted into a laudanum haze. Her breathing labored, but her pain temporarily eased. "I'll be back with help," she promised, squeezing the older woman's hand gently. "Hold on until then." Margaret's eyes fluttered open briefly. "The comb," she whispered. "Show them the comb." Abigail nodded, patting the tin box where the silver comb rested alongside Echo's medallion. "I will." She lifted Echo into her arms, securing him against her chest with a length of cloth fashioned into a carrier, leaving her hands free for climbing. The baby snuggled against her, surprisingly calm despite the chaos around him, as if sensing the importance of their mission. With a final glance at Noah and Margaret, the boy sitting protectively beside his grandmother, the rifle across his knees, Abigail began the descent toward Hidden Valley. The trail was steep and treacherous, made more so by the fading light, but she moved with determination, placing each foot carefully, balancing the precious weight of Echo against her chest. As darkness fell completely, the only guides were the distant pinpricks of cook fires in the valley below and the emerging stars overhead. Abigail thought of her mother's words. "You are the bridge between two worlds." She was crossing that bridge now, step by precarious step, carrying a child who belonged to both worlds, yet fully to neither. The night closed around her like a blanket, hiding her from potential pursuers, but also concealing dangers in her path. Still, she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that lives depended on her success. Margaret's, Noah's, Echo's, and perhaps her own. For in finding her way to the Apache camp, Abigail might also be finding her way home, to a truth about herself and her mother that had been hidden for too long. The stars watched her progress, ancient and indifferent to human suffering, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. Perhaps, as Margaret had suggested, some of those stars were the souls of those who had departed. Her parents, Noah's mother, all those who had walked this earth before and now guided those who remained. If so, Abigail hoped they would light her path through the darkness, leading her to safety and answers in the heart of Hidden Valley. The descent seemed endless, each step bringing new challenges as the trail grew steeper and more difficult to follow in the darkness. Echo slept against Abigail's chest, his small body warm and trusting, unaware of the dangers that surrounded them. Abigail's legs ached from the strain of careful placement on the uneven ground, her arms tired from steadying herself against rocks and tree trunks. Yet she pushed on, knowing that stopping now on this exposed hillside would leave them vulnerable to the cold night air and any predators, human or animal, that might be tracking them. The smoke from the Apache campfires grew more distinct as she neared the valley floor, individual flames now visible among the trees. Abigail estimated she was still a mile or more from the encampment, a distance that seemed insurmountable in her exhausted state. She paused briefly beside a small stream, kneeling to drink and to bathe Echo's face with the cool water. The baby stirred but didn't wake his breathing steady against her neck. In the moonlight, his copper skin glowed with an inner light that made him seem otherworldly, a being caught between realms. As Abigail straightened to continue their journey, a sound froze her in place. A soft crunch of a footstep on pine needles, not her own. She reached slowly for the rifle slung across her back, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake Echo. "I wouldn't," said a quiet voice from the shadows. "Not unless you want to bring the entire camp down on you." Abigail remained perfectly still, her hand hovering near the rifle. "Who's there?" A figure stepped forward, a young Apache man, perhaps 16 or 17, dressed in buckskin and carrying a bow. His long black hair was tied back with a leather thong and his face was painted with symbols Abigail didn't recognize. Most striking were his eyes, dark and assessing, taking in every detail of her appearance. "A white girl," he said in perfect English, surprise evident in his tone. "Carrying an Apache child, this is not something one sees every day." Abigail stood her ground, though fear coursed through her veins. "I need to speak with Chief Thunderhawk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's urgent." The younger warrior's expression hardened. "Thunderhawk speaks with no white person. Not since the raid on our camp. Not since his grandson was taken." "I have his grandson," Abigail said gently, shifting Echo so the warrior could see the baby's face in the moonlight. "I found him abandoned near Copper Creek. I've brought him home." Disbelief flashed across the young man's features, followed quickly by suspicion. "Why would a white child do this? Why not give him to your soldiers or your missionary people?" Abigail reached carefully into her tin box, withdrawing the silver medallion that had been found with Echo. "Because I know what this means," she said, holding it up so the moonlight caught the intricate designs. "And because of this." She pulled out her mother's silver comb, holding it beside the medallion so the matching patterns were clearly visible. The young warrior's eyes widened in recognition, his posture shifting subtly from hostility to wary interest. "Where did you get that comb?" he demanded. "It was my mother's, Elizabeth Holloway. She lived among the Apache for 2 years when she was young, with a woman named Whispering Wind." Abigail held his gaze steadily. "I didn't know this until recently, but I believe it's why I found Echo, why I was meant to bring him home." The warrior studied her face intently, as if searching for truth or deception in her features. Finally, he nodded once. "I will take you to Thunderhawk. But know this. If you speak falsely, if this is some trick, your life is forfeit." "It's no trick," Abigail assured him. "But there's more. My friends are injured up on the trail where our wagon broke. An old woman and a boy, the grandson of Silver Moon who was married to the blacksmith from Copper Creek. They need help urgently." The young man's expression registered surprise at the mention of Silver Moon, a name that clearly held meaning for him. He whistled softly, a sound that carried in the night air. Within moments, 2 more Apache warriors materialized from the shadows, appearing so suddenly that Abigail gasped. The young man spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward the hillside and then to Echo. One of the warriors nodded and disappeared back into the darkness, presumably to find Noah and Margaret. The other remained, his gaze fixed warily on Abigail. "I am Swift Eagle, the son of Thunderhawk's brother," the young warrior told her. "The child you carry would be my cousin if he is truly Thunderbird." "Thunderbird," Abigail repeated. "Is that his name?" Swift Eagle nodded. "So named because he was born during the season of storms when lightning split the sky above our camp." He gestured for her to follow him. "Come. Thunderhawk has mourned his grandson for many days. If you truly bring Thunderbird home, you will be welcomed. If not." He left the threat unspoken. Abigail followed Swift Eagle through the forest, the remaining warrior falling in behind them. She could feel the weight of the man's gaze on her back, the implied threat of his presence, should she make any sudden moves. Yet fear had given way to a strange calm, a sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she had been born to do. You are bar the bridge between two worlds. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, taking on new meaning with each step that brought her closer to the Apache camp. The forest opened suddenly into a clearing filled with teepees and small brush shelters. Cook fires burned at intervals, casting flickering light over the encampment. People moved among the dwellings, women tending fires, older children carrying water, men sitting in councils or working on weapons and tools. All activity ceased as Abigail entered the clearing with Swift Eagle. Every eye turned toward the white girl carrying an Apache baby, expressions ranging from shock to outrage to cautious hope. A murmur ran through the crowd, growing louder as Swift Eagle led Abigail toward the largest teepee at the center of the camp. Outside this dwelling sat an older man, his face deeply lined with age and grief, his long hair streaked with gray. He wore a simple buckskin shirt adorned with beadwork, and around his neck hung a medallion identical to the one Abigail had found with Echo. Despite his age, he radiated a quiet authority that commanded respect. Thunderhawk. The chief looked up as they approached, his dark eyes first registering the confusion, then narrowing with a fierce intensity that made Abigail's heart skip. Swift Eagle spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Abigail and the bundle she carried. Thunderhawk rose slowly, his gaze never leaving Abigail's face. "You bring a child of our people?" he asked in English, as precise as his nephew's. "My grandson," Abigail stepped forward, summoning all her courage. "I believe so," she said, carefully unwrapping Echo, Thunderbird, so his grandfather could see him clearly in the firelight. "I found him abandoned near our settlement. He had this with him." She held out the medallion, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Thunderhawk took it, his weathered fingers tracing the familiar patterns. Then, with a gentleness that belied his stern appearance, he reached for the baby. Abigail transferred Echo to his arms, feeling a pang of loss even as she recognized the rightness of the moment. The chief cradled the child, studying his face with intense concentration. Echo stirred, his dark eyes opening to gaze up at his grandfather. For a long moment, neither moved, locked in a silent communion that transcended words. Then Thunderhawk's stoic expression cracked, emotion flooding his features as he recognized his blood, his lineage, in the baby's face. He spoke softly in Apache words Abigail couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear from the tender way he touched Echo's cheek, the reverent way he held the small body against his chest. "My daughter's son," he said, finally looking up at Abigail, "returned from the dead." His gaze sharpened, becoming more assessing. "Why would a white child do this? Your people took him. Why bring him back?" Abigail withdrew her mother's silver comb from the tin box, holding it so Thunderhawk could see it clearly. "This belonged to my mother, Elizabeth Holloway. She lived among your people many years ago with a woman named Whispering Wind." Recognition flashed in Thunderhawk's eyes. "The pale girl with fire in her hair," he said slowly. "Yes, I remember. My sister took her in after a raid." His gaze returned to Abigail's face, seeing her anew. "You have her look about you, the same eyes that see beyond surfaces." "My mother never told me about her time with your people," Abigail admitted. "I only learned of it after her death. She left me this comb and a note saying I was the bridge between two worlds. I think she knew somehow that this moment would come." Thunderhawk considered this, his expression thoughtful. "The old ones say that time is not a straight path, but a circle. Perhaps your mother walked this circle before you, preparing the way." He gestured to the comb. "Whispering Wind gave her this when she left our people. It marked her as family, though she returned to live among the whites." A commotion at the edge of the clearing interrupted their conversation. The warrior Swift Eagle had sent to find Noah, and Margaret had returned, accompanied by several others carrying improvised stretchers. On one lay Margaret, pale and still, her breathing labored. On the other, Noah, his face tight with pain, but his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the Apache camp. Abigail rushed to them, relief flooding through her. "You found them. Are they all right?" The warrior who had led the rescue party spoke rapidly to Thunderhawk, who listened with grave attention. When the report was complete, the chief nodded and issued commands that sent several women hurrying toward a teepee near his own. Your friends will be cared for, he told Abigail. The old woman is very ill. Her lungs fill with fluid and her bones are broken. The boy's leg is badly injured, but he is young and strong. He will heal. Thank you, Abigail said fervently. They risked everything to help me bring Thunderbird home. Thunderhawk's expression softened slightly. You call him by our name. You know it. Swift Eagle told me, Abigail explained. But I've been calling him Echo because his cry echoed in my heart when I found him. The chief nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. Echo, a good name also among our people. A child may have many names throughout life, each marking a new chapter in their story. He looked down at the baby in his arms. Perhaps he will carry both. Thunderbird for his birth amid storms, Echo for his journey home through your heart. Abigail felt tears prick her eyes, touched by Thunderhawk's words and the acceptance they implied. She had feared anger, suspicion perhaps, even violence, upon reaching the Apache camp. Instead, she had found a complex welcome, cautious but genuine, honoring the bond she had formed with Echo during their brief time together. A woman approached, older with silver streaks in her long black hair and a dignified bearing that reminded Abigail of Margaret. She spoke softly to Thunderhawk, who nodded and carefully transferred Echo to her arms. This is Singing Brook, my sister, he explained to Abigail. She will care for Thunderbird while we speak further. He gestured toward his teepee. Come, there is much to discuss about how you came to find my grandson and why you chose to return him to us. Abigail glanced toward Noah and Margaret, who were being carried toward one of the larger teepees under the supervision of what appeared to be a medicine woman. Your friends will be well tended, Thunderhawk assured her. Rainflower is our most skilled healer. If anyone can help the old woman, it is she. Reassured, Abigail followed Thunderhawk into his dwelling. The interior was warm and surprisingly spacious, lit by a small central fire that sent smoke curling up through an opening at the top. Furs and woven blankets covered the ground, and various tools, weapons, and ceremonial items hung from the supporting poles. The chief gestured for Abigail to sit on a pile of soft furs opposite him across the fire. As she settled herself cross-legged with the tin box beside her, she realized how exhausted she truly was. The journey, the accident, the fear and uncertainty, all had taken their toll. Yet sitting here in the dwelling of an Apache chief, and she felt strangely at peace, as if she had reached a destination she hadn't known she was seeking. Now, Thunderhawk said, his voice low and measured. Tell me everything. Begin with how you found Thunderbird, and end with why a white child would brave such dangers to return an Apache baby to his people. And so Abigail told him about the attack on her family's homestead, about Sheriff Harrison finding her among the ashes, about her silent days at Margaret's house. She spoke of finding Echo by the creek, of the immediate connection she had felt of the medallion that had linked him to her mother's silver comb. She told him about Reverend Montgomery's veiled threats, about the evidence pointing to his involvement in her family's murder, about the decision to flee Copper Creek with the baby. She described Gregory Sullivan's sacrifice to draw off their pursuers, the wagon accident that had injured Noah and Margaret, and her desperate night journey down the mountain to find the Apache camp. Throughout her story, Thunderhawk listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing little of his thoughts. Only when she mentioned Gregory's message, that he had honored his promise to Silver Moon, did the chief's expression change, a flash of recognition crossing his features. When Abigail finally fell silent, emotionally and physically drained by the recounting, Thunderhawk remained quiet for several long moments, considering all she had shared. The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows on the walls of the teepee. Your mother lived among us for 2 years, he said at last. She learned our ways, our language, our stories. Whispering Wind loved her as a daughter and grieved when she was taken by the Blue Coats during a raid. He studied Abigail's face across the flames. I see her spirit in you. The same courage, the same ability to see with the heart rather than just the eyes. I wish I had known, Abigail said softly, about her time here, about Whispering Wind. She never spoke of it. The white world does not look kindly on those who walk between worlds, Thunderhawk observed. She protected you by her silence as mothers do. He leaned forward slightly. But she left you signs, the comb, the note. She knew that someday you might need to find your way to us. And now I have Victor, and Abigail said, a question implicit in her words. What happens next? Thunderhawk's gaze was penetrating, seeing beyond her composed exterior to the exhausted, grieving child beneath. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we will speak of the future. He rose, signaling the end of their conversation. You will stay in my sister's lodge. She will show you where Thunderbird sleeps, so you may see that he is well. Abigail stood suddenly dizzy with fatigue. Thunderhawk steadied her with a surprisingly gentle hand on her shoulder. You have carried many burdens for one so young, he said, his voice softening. But you are not alone anymore. Tonight sleep in safety, knowing you have honored your mother's path and your own. The following morning, as Abigail emerged from Singing Brook's lodge, where she had slept deeply and dreamlessly, she found the camp already bustling with activity. Women were preparing food, men inspecting weapons, children running errands or playing games with hoops and sticks. It struck her how ordinary it all seemed, families going about their daily lives not so different from the routines of Copper Creek. Swift Eagle approached his manor less guarded than the previous night. The old woman still lives, he reported, though Rainflower says her spirit walks close to the Shadowlands. The boy's leg has been set. He asked for you. Abigail followed him to a large teepee where she found Noah sitting up on a bed of furs, his splinted leg extended before him. His face lit up at the sight of her. Abigail, you made it. We weren't sure. He gestured toward a figure on the other side of the teepee, Margaret lying still and pale beneath a pile of furs, Rainflower kneeling beside her. Abigail moved to the old woman's side, kneeling opposite the Apache healer. Margaret's breathing was ragged, her complexion waxy and gray. Yet when Abigail took her hand, the older woman's eyes fluttered open. Child, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You brought us safely to the Apache. Yes, Abigail said, fighting back tears. They're caring for Noah and Echo. Thunderbird is with his grandfather. You were right about everything. A faint smile touched Margaret's lips. Good, that's good. She paused, gathering strength. I need you to promise me something, Abigail. Anything, Abigail replied, squeezing the older woman's frail hand in hers. Whatever happens today, whether you succeed or fail, promise me you will keep building bridges. The world has enough walls, enough hatred. It needs more souls brave enough to span the divides. Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks. I promise, she whispered. I'll try to be the bridge she believed I could be. Margaret's eyes drifted closed, her breathing growing more shallow. Good, she murmured. That's good. Abigail sat with her a moment longer, then rose reluctantly when Swift Eagle appeared at the teepee entrance, his expression urgent. Riders approached from the east, he reported. White men, many of them. Outside, the camp had erupted into controlled chaos. Warriors were gathering weapons, women hurrying children toward the safety of the surrounding forest. Thunderhawk stood at the center, issuing commands with calm authority, Echo secure in Singing Brook's arms nearby. Soldiers, Noah said, having hobbled to the teepee entrance on a crude crutch. Montgomery must have reached the fort and brought back the cavalry. Abigail's heart sank. After all they had endured after successfully returning Echo to his people, would it end in bloodshed anyway? Thunderhawk approached them, his face grave. My scouts count 20 riders, soldiers with the black coat preacher leading them. They will be here within the hour. We have to stop them, Abigail said desperately. There must be a way to prevent more killing. The chief studied her face, weighing her words. My people prepare for war or flight, as we have done many times before. But perhaps there is another way, one that honors your mother's vision of you as a bridge between worlds. Abigail met his gaze, understanding dawning. You want me to speak to the soldiers to try to stop the attack? Not alone, Thunderhawk clarified. With those who stand with you, the blacksmith's son, my nephew Swift Eagle. He glanced toward the large tipi. The old woman spoke of a song your mother taught you, a song from our people. The blessing song, Abigail said, remembering how Noah had recognized the lullaby she sang to Echo. What about it? It is more than a lullaby, Thunderhawk explained. It is an ancient peace song known only to the women of my sister's line. If you were to sing it while carrying Thunderbird, he left the implication hanging. Abigail understood the powerful symbolism Thunderhawk was suggesting. A white girl singing an Apache song carrying the chief's grandson. It would be a living embodiment of the bridge her mother had written about a visual challenge to the narrative of irreconcilable differences between their peoples. I'll do it, she said without hesitation. But I don't know if I remember all the words. I do, Noah interjected. My mother taught me. I can teach you what you've forgotten. Thunderhawk nodded satisfaction in his eyes. Then we prepare. I will send Swift Eagle and 4 warriors with you, unarmed as a sign of peaceful intent. You will speak first as you know the ways of your people, then the song with Thunderbird. The plan was audacious, dangerous. So much could go wrong. A nervous officer, a trigger-happy soldier, Montgomery's poisonous influence. Any of these could turn the encounter deadly in an instant. Yet it seemed their only hope of preventing bloodshed. As Abigail prepared learning the complete blessing song from Noah and gathering her courage for the confrontation ahead, a commotion at the edge of the camp drew everyone's attention. A lone rider approached. Gregory Sullivan, bloodied but alive, his face lighting with relief as he spotted his son. Swift Eagle led Gregory to where Abigail and Noah waited. Father and son embraced the blacksmith's powerful frame gentle as he held his boy. You made it, Gregory said, his voice thick with emotion. All of you. Mrs. Whitman is very ill, Noah told him, and my leg's broken again. But Abigail got Echo, Thunderbird, to his grandfather. Gregory turned to Abigail, genuine admiration in his eyes. Your mother would be proud, girl. You've accomplished what few would even attempt. There's more trouble coming, Abigail said. Montgomery brought soldiers from the fort. They're almost here. Gregory's face darkened. I feared as much when I lost his trail yesterday. He's determined to provoke a war. We're going to try to stop them, Noah explained. Abigail's going to sing the blessing song while holding Thunderbird. Show them that peace is possible. A brave plan, Gregory acknowledged, but dangerous. Montgomery won't give up easily, not when he's so close to getting what he wants. What choice do we have? Abigail asked. More deaths won't bring back those already lost. Not my parents, not Silver Moon, not the Apache killed in the raids. Gregory studied her face, then nodded slowly. Then I'll stand with you. Montgomery and his kind have sown enough hatred in this territory. It's time someone stood for something better. The small delegation assembled at the edge of the camp. Abigail with Echo secure in her arms, Noah balanced on his crutch. Gregory with his arms still bandaged from the gunfight, Swift Eagle and 4 warriors walking beside them, conspicuously unarmed. Thunderhawk stood at the camp's edge watching them go, his weathered face solemn but resolute. They made their way to a small rise that overlooked the approach to Hidden Valley, positioning themselves where they would be clearly visible to the approaching soldiers. The morning sun cast long shadows behind them as they waited, a tableau of unlikely allies united in their determination to prevent bloodshed. The cavalry patrol appeared at the valley's entrance, a column of mounted soldiers led by a young lieutenant whose insignia glinted in the sun. Beside him, his black coat distinctive even at a distance, rode Reverend Montgomery. As the soldiers spotted the waiting group, orders were shouted and the patrol formed a line across the trail. Rifles were readied, but not yet aimed, a precarious balance between caution and aggression. Gregory stepped forward, his hands spread to show he carried no weapon. Lieutenant, he called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I'm Gregory Sullivan, blacksmith from Copper Creek. We need to speak with you before any action is taken. The young officer urged his horse forward, suspicion evident in his bearing. Sullivan, what's your business here? This is a military operation. I'm aware, Gregory replied evenly. I'm also aware that you've been misinformed about the situation. The man beside you, Reverend Montgomery, is wanted for questioning in connection with multiple murders, both of settlers and Apache. Montgomery surged forward, his face mottled with rage. That's a lie. This man is a traitor in league with Apache savages. They've stolen a white child. There is no white child, Gregory interrupted firmly. Only an Apache baby who was kidnapped during a raid on Chief Thunderhawk's camp and later found by Abigail Holloway, a girl whose family was murdered by men under Montgomery's direction. The lieutenant looked between them, clearly uncertain who to believe. These are serious accusations. Do you have any proof? We do, Gregory confirmed. Abigail stepped forward, cradling Echo protectively. She withdrew the silver cross from her pocket, holding it up so it caught the sunlight. This belongs to Reverend Montgomery. He lost it the night he killed my parents. It has his initials carved on the back. Blasphemy, Montgomery hissed. The girl's mad with grief, inventing stories. Sheriff Harrison has documentation, Gregory continued, proving Montgomery's involvement in a conspiracy to seize Apache lands for silver mining. He orchestrated attacks on both settlers and Apache camps, trying to provoke a war that would justify the tribe's removal. The lieutenant frowned clearly, struggling to reconcile these accusations with the orders he'd been given. Even if what you say is true, I have my orders. The Apache in this valley have been declared hostile after multiple raids on settlements. Raids Montgomery arranged himself, then blamed on the Apache, Noah called, unable to remain silent any longer. There's been no official raiding party from this tribe in over 2 years. They've honored their agreements with the army. The lieutenant's frown deepened. This is irregular. I need time to consider these accusations to examine your evidence. There's no time for that, Montgomery snapped. These savages are preparing for war even now. Strike first before they can attack. Abigail sensed the moment slipping away, the lieutenant's indecision threatening to give way to the simpler path of following his original orders. Echo stirred against her chest as if sensing her distress. Without conscious thought, she began to sing, softly at first, then with growing strength. The blessing song Noah had taught her, the ancient words flowed from her lips, a melody both foreign and familiar. Echo grew still, his dark eyes fixed on her face as she sang. Around them, a profound silence fell, the soldiers and their officers seemingly transfixed by the unexpected sound of an Apache prayer coming from a white girl's throat. Even Montgomery fell momentarily silent, his face contorted with disbelief and rage. When Abigail finished the first verse, Noah's voice joined hers from beside her, the Apache words stronger and more confident in his young tenor. Then Swift Eagle added his deeper voice. The three children, white mixed blood and Apache, creating a harmony that seemed to rise above the tense standoff. The effect was powerful, disarming. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, glancing at each other with uncertainty. These were not the bloodthirsty savages they had been told to expect. Not if a white girl sang their songs while cradling one of their children. Lieutenant Wilson held up his hands, signaling for silence when the song ended. Miss Holloway, he said, his voice gentler than before. You truly believe this reverend killed your family? I know he did, Abigail replied steadily. I was hiding in our root cellar. I heard him demanding papers from my father, deeds to our land, which sits on the best water source in the region. When Pa refused, they shot him. Then they burned our home with my mother inside. Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. Sheriff Harabayan found evidence at our homestead that didn't match an Apache attack. Boot prints, bullet casings from Army rifles. And I found this cross in the dirt when I finally came out of hiding. She held Montgomery's gaze as she spoke, refusing to be intimidated by the hatred burning in his eyes. My mother once lived among the Apache. She learned their ways, their songs. She left me a note saying I was the bridge between two worlds. When I found Echo abandoned, I knew I had to bring him home, to complete the circle, to be that bridge. Lies and superstition. Montgomery spat, his composure finally cracking. The girl's mother was no better than a squaw living in sin with these animals. The Holloway family got what they deserved for betraying their race, their faith. His outburst, the admission implicit in his words, shocked even his most sympathetic listeners. Lieutenant Wilson stared at him, reassessing everything he had been told about this mission. Reverend Montgomery, he said carefully, are you admitting involvement in the Holloway massacre? Montgomery realized his error too late. He reached for the pistol concealed beneath his coat, desperation replacing calculation in his movements. The Apache must be driven out, he shouted. The silver in these hills belongs to those who can claim it. Before he could draw his weapon, Gregory moved with surprising speed, tackling the Reverend from his horse. They fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs, Montgomery's pistol discharging harmlessly into the air. The soldiers raised their rifles, but the lieutenant quickly ordered them to stand down. Disarm him and secure him, he commanded as Gregory pinned the struggling preacher to the ground. He'll be returned to Copper Creek to face questioning and likely trial. He turned to Abigail, who stood frozen with Echo clutched protectively to her chest. I apologize, Miss Holloway. It seems we have been gravely misled. He looked toward the Apache camp visible in the distance. I would speak with Chief Thunderhawk if he is willing. If what you say is true, that they've honored their agreements and have not been raiding, then there's no justification for military action. He will meet with you, Abigail said confidently. He sent us as a peace delegation precisely to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. The lieutenant nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Brave of him, and of you, Miss Holloway. He turned to his men. Stand down, we're not engaging today. A collective exhalation of relief passed through the small group. The immediate danger had passed, though much remained uncertain. Montgomery was being bound, his wrists secured behind his back, his face a mask of impotent fury. The soldiers were relaxing their postures, rifles no longer at the ready. As they prepared to ride toward the Apache camp, Swift Eagle slipped away, running ahead to bring news of the peaceful resolution to his people. Abigail walked beside Noah, who leaned heavily on his crutch, his face pale but determined. We did it, he said softly. We actually stopped a war. For today, Abigail cautioned, there's still much to be done. But it's a beginning, Gregory observed, falling into step beside them. A bridge just like your mother said. Abigail looked down at Echo, now sleeping peacefully against her chest, unaware of how close he had come to losing his newly restored family. Yes, she agreed, a beginning. Epilogue: the aspen leaves had turned golden in the high country, their trembling beauty heralding the approach of winter. Abigail sat on the porch of the small cabin that stood at the boundary between settler lands and Apache territory, watching the play of afternoon light through the trees. 4 months had passed since the confrontation on the rise above Hidden Valley. 4 months of change, of healing, of building new connections where old hatreds had festered. Reverend Montgomery had been tried and convicted for the murders of the Holloway family and several others. His conspiracy to incite war for personal gain had shocked even his most devoted followers in Copper Creek. He would spend the remainder of his life in a territorial prison, his dreams of wealth and power turned to dust. Sheriff Harrison had returned to his duties in Copper Creek, but with a lighter heart. The burden of guilt he had carried since saving Abigail's mother from the massacre years ago had eased. He visited the boundary cabin, often bringing news and supplies, checking on Abigail's welfare with paternal concern. Gregory and Noah Sullivan had rebuilt their lives as well. The blacksmith continued his trade in Copper Creek, but with a new openness about his late wife's heritage and his son's connection to the Apache. Noah divided his time between town and Hidden Valley, learning the skills and stories of his mother's people, while maintaining his place in the settler community. Margaret Whitman had not survived to see the fruits of their journey. Despite Rainflower's best efforts, the elderly healer had succumbed to her injuries and illness 2 days after reaching the Apache camp. She was buried with honor in a peaceful spot overlooking Hidden Valley, mourned by both Apache and settlers alike, one of the first shared rituals between the two communities in a generation. And Abigail, she had chosen neither to return to Copper Creek with the Sullivans nor to live permanently among the Apache. Instead, with Thunderhawk's blessing and Harrison's reluctant support, she had established herself in this small cabin at the boundary, a physical manifestation of the bridge she continued to build between the two communities. Children came to her for lessons, Apache children learning English and settler children curious about their neighbors' language and customs. She taught them all, creating a space where differences were explored rather than feared, where common ground was discovered beneath surface distinctions. And Echo, Thunderbird, visited, often carried by his grandfather or Singing Brook for regular stays with the red-haired girl who had saved him. Though he lived permanently with his tribe growing strong in the traditions of his people, the bond between him and Abigail remained unbroken. Thunderhawk ensured that Thunderbird would know both worlds, just as Elizabeth Holloway had intended for her daughter. On this golden autumn afternoon, Abigail's thoughts turned to her mother, to the silver comb that now hung proudly in her cabin, to the note that had guided her journey. You are the bridge between two worlds. Elizabeth had known, perhaps not the specific path her daughter would walk, but the role she was meant to play in healing the divisions of this harsh territory. The sound of approaching horses drew Abigail from her reverie. Rising from her chair, she shaded her eyes against the slanting sunlight to see who was coming. Swift Eagle led the small party, now a trusted friend and regular visitor. Behind him rode Singing Brook, and in her arms, wrapped warmly against the autumn chill, sat Thunderbird, his dark eyes bright with intelligence and recognition. Abigail smiled, descending the porch steps to greet them. Echo, now nearly 10 months old, reached for her eagerly, his chubby hands opening and closing in the universal gesture of a child who knows exactly where he belongs. As she took him into her arms, feeling his solid weight and the steady beat of his heart against her own, Abigail felt a sense of rightness wash over her. This was not the family she had been born to, nor the life she had expected, but it was hers nonetheless, cobbled together from tragedy and hope, spanning the divide between worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. "Welcome," she said, using both English and Apache, the languages flowing together as naturally as the streams that fed the valley beyond. "Come inside. I've been waiting for you." Echo patted her cheek with a small hand, his dark eyes, ancient and knowing from birth, meeting hers with perfect understanding. No words were needed between them, their connection transcending language, blood, and the artificial boundaries humans created to separate themselves from one another. Behind them, the aspen leaves continued their golden dance, witnesses to a story that would be told for generations. Of a little orphan girl who carried an Apache baby across a war zone, and by dawn, 300 warriors had knelt before her. Not in submission, but in recognition of a truth as old as the mountains themselves, that the strongest bridges are built not of wood or stone, but of courage, compassion, and the willingness to see beyond the surface to the shared humanity beneath. And sometimes when the world is cracking in half, the bridge is not built by generals or preachers or lawmen, but by a dusty child who carries love like a weapon and peace like a prayer. Abigail Rose Holloway had become that bridge.